Seph Gentle is a software engineer working on freeing us from the tyranny of big tech. He also, for the last 10 years, has been working on collaborative editing software. Casually, he also has a blog called josephgentle.com, and every single time he posts, it makes it to the top page of Hacker News, the front page. He's a minor celebrity in the computer geek community. He also, in his free time, likes improv and circus and Lego. I met him recently at a Feel Your Feelings retreat run by Jesse McKay. I knew him before that, but we caught up at the retreat, and he had a lot of wisdom to share. And so I thought I would bring him here today on the podcast and introduce him to all of you. I hope you enjoy it. Seph Gentle, it's nice to see you again.
Yeah, nice to see you too, Serene.
Yeah, so we know each other. We've been friends for a few years now, although we are geographically challenged. We don't see each other very often. But most recently, we went to Jesse McKay's retreat together. It was a 5-day intensive Feel Your Feelings retreat. And nobody seems to know how to describe it. But we definitely spoke a lot then.
Yeah, I sometimes describe it as we're in we spend a week crying together, and I think that my mom, I don't know, I think basically everyone we get a lot out of this sort of thing, and I was trying to a while ago trying to tell my mom that she should go to something like this, and she was like, no, I'm old now, like I can just have my problems for the rest of my life. I don't need to spend weeks crying. That sounds awful. And I'm like, but but a week or two crying, and then you don't have to have a problem for the rest of your life. And she's like, oh no, it's fine. I know all the problems I have. So yeah.
Tim, a friend of ours, Tim Jostling, said at some point, you're still really young, and so if you get all of your problems out of the way early, then you won't have to deal, like, they won't be on your back for the next 40 years, because he's 65 or something, a good 65, but he's 65, so he's like, when you're 28, just get them all cleared up now, and then in your 30s or 40s, you've just got like a clear conscience, or you're mindful, you're aware of your feelings and things like that.
Yeah. I mean, I've long had this philosophy that how do I describe it? It's this idea that if you can get a few percent better every year, like I don't know, a lot of my life I've want things in the future, and I struggle to bring that into the now, right? Sometimes I struggle to do things. I think I'm kind of somewhere on the ADHD spectrum, but something I find really easy to do is feel love for future me. So I really want, like, I'm really struggling to get some stuff done, but I really want me in 5 years to be like in a primo place for getting things done. So at the very least, if I spend my time doing things that are going to make the me in 5 years feel more capable of doing the things that, maybe me in 5 years will be able to do it. So I can just like love me in 5 years by doing things like getting the crying out of the way, like resolving my issues.
I like that. Love me in 5 years. Okay. That's a good thing to focus on. I don't think I've had that thought before. Because I've had love, I found that having love for me in the past, when I think about things I regret, having real compassion for the past version of me has been really helpful. Like if somebody does me wrong, I kind of jump to having, not, maybe I don't jump to, but when I'm reflecting, I oftentimes bring up compassion for them. But actually, I realized I wasn't doing it for myself. And so that was very helpful for me.
Yeah, I really struggle with that one as well, for what it's worth. It was actually something Jesse said to me at a previous retreat. We're doing some meditation, and he said when doing a lot of healing work, the first step is often to find compassion for yourself, and then he's not sure if there's any other steps. Like, that just feeling love towards yourself and who you were in that moment is often all you really need to be able to do a lot of the healing work. But we don't want to do that. I went for a walk the other week after we got back from the retreat, and I was thinking about my regrets. Obviously, the things I regret, and for each of them, I was trying to feel love toward. I was like trying to feel compassion, and I don't think I could do it. I was really hard. It was pulling teeth. I was like, no, but if I don't feel regret over this thing, maybe I'll do it again. Maybe, but it was bad. That was a bad thing. That bad thing shouldn't have happened. And I'm like, no, breathe. Like, it's okay that happened. It's okay. I was 20. It's okay. Like whatever. It's like, no. So
Yeah.
yeah, that one.
Yeah, I do that too. It's like I don't I don't I don't respect myself enough to think that I will make better decisions in the future unless I carry on this backpack full of anger at myself all the time. Unless I'm
Yeah.
constantly feeling self-loathing, I won't understand how to do the best things, or better things in the future. Yeah.
Yeah. I was watching. This has come up in a bunch of. I'm a really big fan of Dr. K. He's a psychologist who does YouTube videos and YouTube sessions, which are fascinating. But he was talking. He was talking about this idea of ambition and like carrying that backpack. Someone at the retreat, we were chatting, and she said to me, someone that I don't think that you liked at the retreat, which was quite funny. She said to me that she was like, well, but I couldn't put the backpack down. Like all of the people that I know that are really successful, they all hate failure so much. They hate failure the most. Like they all like have the whip on their back. So obviously, by implication, she should have a whip on her back, and that's how she'll be successful, like the people that she looks up to. And and it's this kind of quality. Like I was talking to someone about this. I've got I'm like I like donated so a gay couple can have kids. So there's a couple genetic children of mine running around that I don't have to do any of the parenting work for. But I was hanging out with one of them, and he's like this little boy. He's like 6, I think. I should know that. And he's just like his brain thinks the same way mine does. And he's got this box, and he made a little ramp out of it with cardboard, and then he's rolling this little car down the ramp, and then trying to aim it and trying to like hit something. And he's so in this, like every part of his being is obsessed with this problem in that moment. And like the question is, because this is the thing, it's like, well, like Dr. K made this point that ambition and that like whip at your back, that'll get you about 90% of the way there, which is really long way, right? Like that's a lot, but to get that last 10%, you need to have the instinct that that little boy has when he is obsessively loving rolling this car down, because he's going to learn and think things, and he'll be in this like natural place of what comes next, like this natural place of play that tells him where to go next with his ideas. That I think that if you're like beating yourself up over it and feeling all of this external pressure, like extrinsic pressure, I don't think you can really tap into naturally. But then of course the fear is always exactly as you said, that well, if I take that whip away, then maybe I'll just sit on my ass and not do anything. Right? Like you almost have to like risk the whole house on that, in terms of, to say, well, okay, let's just, let's just sit on your ass for a while, see what happens. Oh, it's kind of boring. Okay, what do you want? Oh, okay, I kind of want to do things. Okay, what do you want? Well, I look out at the world and I have these thoughts. I really want the world to be different in this way. But then notice the sound. It's not like I should make the world different. It's I want, right? Which is a different energy, totally different energy. And then it's like, I want to have this impact on the world. I want to do this project. How much do I want it? I'm going to express my want through my actions and through my planning and through everything else. And I think this is like really, really hard, but I feel like this is the, this is the thing that I aspire to get towards. I've been doing improv for the last couple of years, and I'm not very good at improv, but I saw my improv teacher. We've been joking that, if he started a cult, I'd join his cult. He's basically like, a wise Buddhist master that only thinks that he's an improv teacher. But he talks a lot about this idea of just like, when you're on stage, the question to ask isn't what to do to be funny or whatever. It's just like, what comes next, like, and what comes next can include like listening to your instinct for story, or listening to your instinct for what you want, or listening to how you feel. But that what comes next question often comes with a pause of just taking a moment to breathe and look at the audience and look at your scene partners, and the answers that you come up with from that place, instead of from the like go, like quick, we've got to be really panicky and we've really got to be really anxious, that you end up, it's like the improv's way better. And I think also whatever work, like you've got a piano in the background, and I got an electric piano a couple weeks ago, which I'm very excited by, and I've been playing around with a lot. But if I can, if you follow that instinct for what comes next, it's like, oh, this chord sounds good. Oh, what does it want? it wants this other bit of music that wants to go next.
Yeah.
Oh no, I'm trying to like find it. I can't find it because I'm not very good at piano. I've only just started. That's okay. Like, oh, okay. So I can feel that pain of the longing in me for the music to go someplace that it wants. And that just sits with me. And then I do something else, like, but that process of what comes next musically, then it's like, okay, I'm sitting with this feeling of wanting to express these musical ideas and I don't have the skill to do it. Okay, well now I want to go and learn some more theory. Now I want to go and like, watch some YouTube tutorials, do whatever, play around some more to see if I can find more expressive capability in my capacity to play so that when there's when I have those instincts of what I want to come next, I've got more tools in my tool belt that I can pull out and be like, maybe this. Oh, hey, that does sound good actually. And yeah.
Playing music is a lot of, I found improvising is a lot of finding what doesn't work and then not playing that. It's mostly that. I mean, there's easier ways. There's also shortcuts like learning the circle of fifths. You can like pull up a chart and it's pretty easy to learn. And then as soon as you know the circle of fifths, it gets so much easier to write songs. It's like, I mean, a certain type of song, but like,
yeah.
But it is interesting that you said that initially when you started talking. You said that Dr. K says that you can have the whip on your back and it'll get you 90%. And I think the whip on the back is important, maybe. I mean, I haven't personally found a way to get things done without any whip, but I wonder if people should be asking themselves, and I have asked myself this in the past as well, if I'm using the whip 90% of the time, do I really want to be doing the thing?
Right.
Because I've done a lot of things because I thought I should be doing them because it will make me money because I was scared, or I mean that's been mostly it. Like I did a lot of computer programming, and then but it was just like Sisyphus pushing the rock uphill. It was like grueling and difficult, and I had to force myself to do it. And now I can program, but it's not like playing music for an hour a day is so much easier, so much more engaging and enjoyable. And then I just find myself naturally gravitating to doing it more. Now, does music on average pay anywhere near computer science? No, but I don't know. It's we all have our own skills and our own interests, and I think a lot of us are taught to kind of force ourselves into things when we don't necessarily need to.
Yeah, I mean, there was that experiment. God, this is a long time ago in Predictably Irrational. Dan O'Reilly. He talked about this experiment where they got students at university, college, and to one group of students they said, "Can you assemble these Lego sets for us? We'll pay you $50." And $50 an hour. Another group they said, "Can you assemble these Lego sets? We'll pay you 50 cents an hour." Another group they said, "Can you just assemble these Lego sets for us?" And of course, like the group that did it for free assembled way more Lego sets before leaving than the group that was paid 50 cents, right? And the economists are like, well, that's so irrational, these human beings. But the obvious conclusion, and it makes sense, right? If someone's like, "Oh yeah, I'll give you 50 cents an hour to sit here making Lego sets," yeah. I make Lego sets for free, but I ain't doing it for 50 cents an hour. That's ridiculous. And that is ridiculous that we have that instinct. But that's right. It's like the whip at the back. If we're focusing on the whip and on that sense of shouldness, right? Like that pressure on ourselves, then that saps all of the intrinsic motivation out of something.
Mm.
Like you talk about music, but you just gravitate towards music because you like it. But what you're doing, I mean, if you imagine liking not as something that you're like, not as a river that you're dumped inside of, but it's something that you're doing, like you're doing the liking part of music, where you sit down and then you do something because you like it, and you listen to what you like, and then you do the thing that you like, and that's got a natural energy to it, which is quite fun, right? It's enjoyable. It builds.
That's fascinating. I'm doing the music. You're right, because I'm doing the music and I'm also doing the liking or the obligating, because I also do the obligating, or I'm doing so many different things when I'm doing a task, right? I'm doing the remembering past experiences and the bringing up emotions, and it is about doing the liking. Yeah, go on.
yeah, I've noticed recently that there's a part of my mind that is doing a sort of like wide attention, like, oh no, is there something else I should be paying attention to, that I'm not, that I should feel anxious about? So there's like some anxiety voice that I'm also doing. But the question then, I mean, when you're programming, and to name it, like, it's okay if you don't like programming. I love programming. It's okay if you don't like it.
I want to go
But
more into that as well afterwards. Yeah.
yeah. But like, I got into programming when I was 10, and I wasn't doing it. There was no whip at my back as a 10-year-old. Like, I just really liked it, you know. And then later, other things happened, but I already had that relationship with programming that wasn't about anyone else. And when people, I don't know, I went to university and I'd studied computer science, and some of my classes were really boring. But I just didn't really pay attention in those ones, or I like found other classes, right? Because my relationship with programming is a fun relationship. And then I've really struggled professionally to do boring consulting work because some kinds of jobs don't have that liking part in the job. I just can't find it in the office. I can't find it in the work. I can't find it in my teammates and my coworkers. The relationship they have with programming is one of like, no, I'm literally only here because you're paying me money.
Yeah.
This is boring. You know, I hate this, but it's not boring enough that I'm not going to do it. I'm paid well enough. I can feed my family. I can, you know, dissociate from the fact that I don't enjoy this, and just kind of, you know, make myself do it enough. It's not odious enough that I won't do it in exchange for $100,000 or whatever. So
Yeah, I will
you know,
dissociate 8 hours a day for $100,000. That is
yeah,
the
yeah,
deal.
and I've realized, like, all of the trauma-ish things that we have, like, this is something that Jesse was pointing out, and he's totally right. They've all basically, you build a strength with all of them. So like, one of my survival strategies is that whenever I'm in a room, particularly with strangers where I'm not really sure, I like, I hypervigilant might be the word. I obsess over what everyone else thinks of me, you know, and I'm there, and I'm like watching and tracking everyone's emotional state in the room so that I know if someone's going to be annoyed or having some experience, then I want to be like careful with what I say, because there's some part of me that fundamentally believes that if someone gets angry at me, it's because I'm a bad person and I should feel bad about myself. You know, and this is like childhood trauma stuff. But out of that survival strategy that I've had since I was a kid, I've got some strengths. So actually, like, even if I get over that, which I'm working on, then I'm actually really good at reading people. Like, I'm really good at noticing, you know, in a conversation, if someone hasn't said something for a while, or someone else like wants to speak, or someone's a bit frustrated, I'll pick up on it and call attention to it, because it just pops up in my attention, which it doesn't pop up for other people. But like, you're talking about, you know, like, some people, like, one of my other flaws is this. I think, as I say, jury's still out on whether I have ADHD, but I can't really do that. Like, I don't think I can really sit in a room and dissociate for 8 hours a day in exchange for $100,000. I don't think I could do it for any amount of money. Like, it just feels like, it feels physically painful to me. Like, I would rather be punched repeatedly than do that every day at a job.
At least I'm feeling something.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and like, that brings, there's the upside and downside. Like, the downside is I don't have freedom, you know. Like, the thing I'm looking for with that social awareness is freedom to put that down sometimes, like freedom to choose when I use it, when I don't use it. That's the metric. And with this sort of thing, yeah, it's like, you know, you might have more freedom than I do to program even though you hate it.
Yeah.
Which means that you can just have that relationship with programming if you want to. And I have a really hard time having that relationship with anything because of my weaknesses. But the strength of that then way that I'm showing up is that I have to find a way to make it fun. I have to find a way to be motivated in something if I'm going to do it at all. And yeah, I don't know. That's all there.
How did you like school then? Because school inevitably has things that include subjects that we hate.
Yeah, it was really hard.
Yeah.
In high school, I had a mental ranking of every subject. And over time, as I got to pick more and more of my subjects, other subjects that I previously enjoyed kind of went down in ranking. I would procrastinate every assignment basically, and I'd be there at 3-4 a.m. trying to do an essay every time before essays were due. I'm always much preferred exams, because in an exam it was just much easier for me to concentrate, and all my marks from exams were much better than my assignments. But then there were the subjects that I enjoyed, and I enjoyed maths. I feel really frustrated about this, that like there's this sort of idea of like, oh no, oh maths, oh it's so awful, it's so whatever. And I feel like it's that kind of quality of like, I have to do this, so I'm making myself do it. And then you end up in classes with teachers that don't make maths fun because maths wasn't fun for them. Like the idea of maths being fun is not a concept that they have.
Yeah.
So then in their room, maths isn't fun. What's your experience of that with not fun? What happens? You don't want to do it. You don't want to be there.
Yeah.
So you kind of vaguely hate it. Well, what happens when you hate something? You don't want to do it as much. So that the result of that is you're not very good at it. So you stay in the like crap classes with the crap teachers, and that's a loop. That's a closed loop. I got really lucky and I escaped that by enjoying maths before I went to school a bit. My dad, I don't know, like showed me a few different things, and then I was like, oh, this is cool. And then I ended up in a gifted and talented program, which again is like largely genetic lottery. But then I just had really good maths teachers, and so that was really fun. Then my teacher would be like, oh, what about this thing? And I'm like, what about these other things? And then and like you're looking for the beauty in it because maths is really beautiful. It's like genuinely really beautiful. Like the things, the ways that maths clicks together sometimes. And I find this in programming as well. This absolute beauty, and it's got this like this mechanical beauty of the ways that things can just like. If you ever got, I mean, I was on psychedelics one time, and it's me. There was this tub of Lego bricks just floating around, and I had two cogs, and I lined them up properly, and like just no friction, two cogs moving against each other, and it was just the most beautiful thing in the universe. I was because that's gorgeous, and it's gorgeous in a certain kind of movement kind of way of things working and fitting and moving smoothly. And maths, if you like, there's always like there's this question around framing things that I think about a lot of not just what's the answer to a question, but what's the question you're posing. So I think about this with politics, like what are the questions that we're asking when we think about who do we want to vote for, or like what. And it's not just what's important to us, it's like how are you seeing the political process, what's your perception, because the stories that we tell ourselves are the glasses, are the eyeballs through which you're looking at the world. And then that affects the world that you're experiencing, and then that affects how you're relating with the world that you're experiencing. That's all a closed loop. So so I think about things like mathematics, and it's like it's beautiful, but it's beautiful if you can put on the maths is beautiful glasses, and then you can see that beauty. And I don't know, it's something I've discovered. I've been learning more and more since leaving university and school and everything, which is just in school I hated history because history was boring and they kept talking about convicts and whatever else. But now as an adult, I'm like, oh no, there's a beauty in history. Like the stories are really interesting. Oh, why didn't they tell us the interesting stories in school? Why didn't I let myself experience the joy and wonder of history when I was a high school student? And there's joy in music. I took music lessons as a 8-year-old, and it was all like, here's the thing to play. Here's some sheet music. Boom, 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 boom. And it's like, this isn't even music. Like, I don't know. I can't tell if it sounds right or wrong because it's not trying to sound, it doesn't have any musicality to it.
Yeah.
And then I was like, I don't know, getting like, I mean, not actually whacked on the fingers, but like, do your homework. Why didn't you do your homework? And I'm like, because it's boring, And, oh, well, I guess music's not for me. But then as an adult, I'm like, oh, I can just buy an electric keyboard. Oh, this sounds good. Oh, if I go that and then that sounds good. Oh my gosh. If I just push the notes in the right order, it sounds great. That's really fun. It feels really good. I made up a little tune, and then I had my own tune stuck in my head for about a week.
It's the best feeling.
And then I played something else that I made up as well that sounded sad, and then I felt really sad. Which is like, is that a thing that people experience? So
there's this childlike sense of wonder that you have for the world that is it's so easy, it's so contagious. Like everything you talk about, it's like, oh my god, computers, and oh my god, music. But it's like you said, you started evolving past school and past university, and it's like school and university, I think, sometimes take us away from our kind of basic humanity. And maybe that's an over dramatized statement, but like music is something that humans have played with forever. I mean, you see like these tribes in Africa that maybe had less Western contact, and the adults will like stand around and like clap together and play all these kind of musical games, and then and sing together, and they don't have to have like perfect singing voices. Everyone just sings. Like it's not about how good is your pitch, and how much vibrato do you have? And then in school it's like we have to write about music. Like, this isn't music. Homework is what? Like, and go on.
I was watching like some little video series about music theory, and he's like, all right, first things first, there's a bunch of music theory, but your ears are right.
Yeah.
When your ears in music theory disagree, your ears are always right.
Yeah.
And I was like, good, yes, like that makes a lot of sense. I mean, this is something I've been struggling with for years. Ever since I was a kid, I wanted to be able to draw, and a bunch of times throughout my life, I've started drawing, and then I've looked at the things that I've drawn, and they're terrible, and I feel bad because I've drawn something bad, and therefore I must be bad at things. So then I stopped drawing, and I've repeated that pattern about 4 or 5 times since I was a kid. So about 6 months ago, I was like, no, stuff that. And I got an iPad and I got an Apple Pencil, and I've been drawing things, and it's emotionally difficult. I'm like, this is a bad drawing. Every time I draw something bad, part of my brain says, you're bad at drawing, you should just stop.
I've created something bad and put it into the universe.
That's right. I should feel bad about myself. And every time I draw something good, I think, this is the last good drawing I'm ever going to do. I should just stop while I'm ahead. That's the only right way, And but over time, like, it's just like, oh, no, I can just noodle. Like, there's this sort of permission that we don't get from schooling. That's, I was talking to my dad about piano. This is the thing I didn't have as a kid, of just play. And play not as play the piano as in push the right buttons, but play as in push any buttons. Like, just do that for a while. Have fun, You're not going to want to make it sound bad, but maybe you do or don't know how to make it sound good. Maybe you'll find something interesting. There's this sense of childlike play that results in the outcomes, all of the outcomes that you're looking for. I was talking to you about this at the retreat, but there's this idea that I think about a lot. It's this, it's the barn of everything. There's a barn, and it doesn't have any windows and doors, but everything in the universe is inside this barn. And not just physical things. So like money, you think about money as a real thing. It's real, but money is just a made up idea. Like, they're just bits of paper, but we make real money. We make money real by the way that we relate with it and the way that we do things. We have the idea of a person. We have the idea of a house. This apartment is just a bunch of atoms, but I and everyone that looks at it projects onto it this extra idea, which isn't just the atoms. It's the idea of an apartment. It's the idea of a space, of a building. There's no building atoms in it. There's just atoms, but we project onto it our perception. So in the barn, we can make windows into the barn, and each window is a story, or it's a perception that we have. So we can have the window of money, where I can look at the world from the perspective of money. And if I look inside that window, I can see a bunch of things inside the barn. It's a very cluttered barn. Obviously, there's everything inside of it. So every time I look in the barn through a different window, I'm going to see totally different things. And the things that I see are real things, right? So if I look through the window of right and wrong, there's some things that are good and some things that are bad, I can see a bunch of stuff. It illuminates it. We can see that, there are things that will make the world better, and there are things that cause suffering in the world. There's things that we want to do in ourselves that are ennobling, and there's things that bring us down and make society worse. Those are all real things. But then you can walk around to the other side of the barn and you look at a different window, and maybe you see this idea that everyone is the hero of their own story, and that the outcomes don't really matter so much, and we're all just a bunch of beings that are looking for love and looking for enjoyment in the world, right? And then you walk around to another window and you see that everything's fundamentally about incentive systems and about whatever. And you walk around in another window and everything's about play, and everything's just about the question of what comes next. And like, we can just, this is all like of an ilk, because I'm in that headspace. And the really hard thing in this metaphor is in giving yourself the freedom to look at the same idea through different lenses. Because whenever you look through a window, they're always seductive. It's like, oh no, but look at all the things I can see. Look, if I stay at this window for long enough, I can see more things. It's like, but if you walk around the other side of the barn, liberal and conservative, left and right wing, authoritarian, libertarian, like, these are all just different windows on the barn. And like, you've got your favorites, you've got your favorite windows, but that's not to say that if you go around and look at the world through someone else's window, that you won't also see some things inside the barn, because you will, and you're going to see different things. And that's it's like, that's hard for us.
Yeah, a lot of people live life through this window of like, capitalism is bad. And so every time I'm thinking of a friend of mine in particular who's very wise, but he's just in this capitalism is bad window a lot. And so like, it's even difficult for him. He's got a business. I don't need to talk about it, but like I was giving him money for his business, his like little side project, and he had difficulty taking the money because capitalism is bad. And like,
Right.
I mean, another window that you could look at it is that capitalism, money is power, and so if I want to do good things, it's good to have power, and then I can go do good things with the power. I was going to ask you actually, because I didn't mention this before, but you are also a very talented programmer.
Thank you.
Did, do you apply these? I don't exactly know what to call this. Is it mindfulness? I mean, it's some sort of it's self development, like the window thing, the barn thing.
Yeah. I don't know what to call it either. I should come up with a name for it. That'd be that'd be good. I do. I mean, and in a bunch of different weird little ways. Like I think a lot of programmers. I think I have a hard time explaining myself. I go to programming conferences sometimes, and people want to know what kind of programmer I am. And it's like, what window through the barn am I looking in? Am I a web programmer? Am I a, do I do like, native mobile work? Do I do backend? Like, what kind of things do I do? And it's like, well, I follow my instincts. And then it's like, well, do I do the kind of code that's the sort of code that Google likes, which is all very, well specified and lots of unit tests and blah, blah, blah. Or do I just throw things together and am I kind of a scrappy programmer? It's like, well, those are just different windows. Like different projects call for different ways for us to show up. And in the same project, throughout different points in the same project's life cycle, we're called to relate with the software in different ways. Like when you're trying to figure out what your product should even be, then it makes sense to be really scrappy and throw things at the wall and see what sticks and delete a lot of code as you go. For it to have this kind of hands-on exploratory process with, it's just kind of a conversation between you and the computer and your users. But later in a product's life cycle or different kinds of projects, like if you're working on an operating system or a file system or something, it often makes sense. Like what you want to build is very well known and well specified, but you want to make yours be good and fast. And so then it makes sense for your attention to be attending to the specifics of what that means. So doing a good job, right? Like caring about the product, caring about the outcome. In those cases, looks like adding a lot of code, but adding lots of tests and having this kind of rigorousness about it. But yeah, I mean, and I also think about this a lot in terms of how we relate with the computers at all, because I mean, people don't, computers are made up, right? Like everything that a computer does, humans decided. Like there's no, we didn't discover computing. Like we didn't discover, well, we might have discovered computing. We didn't discover Microsoft Windows, buried in the ashes of, past civilizations. We made it up. Every aspect, every tiny little decision in Windows, that was all invented by a person. And the same in macOS, the same in our phones, like all of this. And we've got, I mean, I feel constantly frustrated that I feel like we've got so much more freedom in terms of what our computing devices could be than we let ourselves think about. Like I have my phone here, and my phone is this, it's like this list of corporate logos. It's like a NASCAR kind of thing. And desktop, and like desktop, like that's okay. Like it's actually a reasonable way to organize my stuff. But on old desktop computers, they had a kind of much more idealistic, optimistic idea of like, well, maybe we can have these things called documents and files, but a file might be able to be opened by lots of different programs. So the thing in the middle is like folders and files, because that's how the users decided to organize their own ideas and their own concepts. But then applications can be like, oh, maybe I've got a folder for maybe you're making a podcast. You might have a folder on your computer with lots of files to do with the podcast. And each of those files, maybe one of them is a sound file that could be opened by multiple different programs. So there's a MP3 or a WAV file, and it can be opened by lots of programs. So that's like a different paradigm. But they're both made up, right? Like they're both completely invented. And I like to ask myself the question a lot of, well, if we found an alien civilization and they also did computing, they also made computers, they made interfaces, how would they do it? Or like if the world, sometimes I think about the idea that like, imagine if the world was actually the size of Jupiter. So the scale is really hard to imagine, but all of the surface of the Earth to Jupiter is about the size of Tasmania to the whole surface of the Earth.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe on Jupiter we wouldn't have yet flown around the whole world. There'd just be like vast, unstretched forests. There might be civilizations out there of humans that are doing their whole own thing, but a really long way that way, and no one's gone there yet. Like, we just don't know.
And Earth is like a country.
Yeah, Earth is like a country, and there's other countries. We have no idea. There's like this massive unknown of just other parts of our own planet. So if that was true, maybe two civilizations could have independently designed computers, and I bet they would have been really different. Like, I bet the fundamental paradigms, I bet the ideas that we would use to describe them would be different. And I like programming languages. I think a lot of programming languages have lots of great ideas, and I think there's a lot of exploration of people inventing different programming languages that we see. And I think people invent kind of different kinds of applications, but the idea of an application, the idea of a file, the idea of an operating system, and this kind of software that runs your computer, I think these things could be vastly different. And I think it'd be really cool if they were, you know? Like, I just think there's other ways that, like, for example, this is something that I've been thinking about a lot lately. I've been playing around. Anyone who knows me in other contexts knows that I spent the last decade or so playing with collaborative technology. So how do we, use, how do we build computing systems that can let people collaboratively edit everything? So from that perspective, we've got right now this idea of a file, and a file is some bytes on your computer. The computer doesn't understand what the bytes are, by the way. Like, the operating system just knows that it's like if you imagine them as numbers from 0 to 255, it's like 100, 12, 42, 16, and then it just goes like that for about a million more.
Puts colors on the screen.
Yeah. And maybe each number corresponds to a color, and maybe each number corresponds to a letter in a text document. And we've got special numbers, which mean then I hit enter. And then in a different program, we'll make each number refer to, we'll group them together, and then we'll use that as a big number, and then use that to describe, where on a Premiere Pro timeline some particular clip sits. And then a different program will use the same bytes in a different way. But I actually think that files are kind of obsolete. They're a crap idea. I mean, like, they made sense in the 70s, but now we've got this problem that I don't have one computer. Like, in my apartment, I have three computers, three like desktop computers, and a phone and an iPad. So 5 computers. And I just want a document to exist across all of them, and such that whenever I sit at any computer, all my stuff's just there. And then I want to take any of those and share it with you, and have you to be able to edit it with me. And that should all just work. And
yeah, right now we can do that with Google Docs, sort of. But then, like, I can't send edited documents, like edited videos, for instance, to somebody else.
Yeah. And Google spent millions of dollars to make Google Docs, and you can't run Google Docs yourself. So you can use Google Docs, but only if Google owns all of your stuff. And if one of their AIs flags something that you said in a YouTube comment, they'll just suspend your entire Google account, and you've lost all of your stuff. That's a thing that happens. But if people at Google are big enough fuss on social media, maybe they'll restore it. But who knows how many accounts?
Do you want to risk that?
Yeah, and not just risk that, but like, I've got a friend who, when she was a teenager, blogged a whole lot on like LiveJournal, one of these old sites. And she went recently to try and find that content, and it's all gone because LiveJournal got bought by someone that shut the whole thing down, and all of this writing that she did as a kid is all gone because of a series of corporate mergers. Someone else in Hacker News a while ago was talking about how they've got some old CDs. So they used to do a whole lot of photography, and they have these raw files that were like Adobe Lightroom files. And they saved a copy of Adobe Lightroom to the CD, so they could just run Adobe Lightroom, whatever the version was they bought with their own, with their money, with all of the files. But Adobe's shut down all their old activation servers. So even if you've got a copy of Adobe Lightroom, can they still open these Adobe Lightroom files? I don't know. I don't know if you can run that old version of Adobe Lightroom.
Yeah.
Like, what? Like, this is a ridiculous situation. We've got open source software, and our open source movement's a whole thing. But the open source movement can't compete with Google Docs, because all of the open source software is still in this files-based world. And if you want to compete with Google Docs, then you need, you're going to get punished if you're successful by lots of people. I mean, like, just to explain it a little bit more, the way Google Docs works is that your computer is kind of a bit dumb. Your computer doesn't really have to understand much. A lot of the more complicated code that makes Google Docs works is owned by Google, and it runs on computers that Google runs inside Google's data centers. So whenever you open up Google Docs, your computer literally sends a message to another computer over the internet, to one of Google's computers, saying, hey, can I open up this URL? And then the Google Docs computer sends your computer all the code to make Google Docs work. And when you make changes, your computer sends to Google's computers what those changes are. So Google has the document. Your computer kind of has a copy of it just while you got the tab open. Well, then you close your tab, but it's okay because Google has the document. But you're not in charge. So open source software can't really compete, because if it wanted to compete on those terms, open source developers would need to be paying for hosting for all of the computers that are sitting in the cloud, owning everyone's data. Like, I don't want that, and that would be expensive. And it's like bad in every metric.
Yeah.
So I mean, like, the way that I see it, we need to kind of dig down deep into how computers work and say, hey, let's redesign the idea of a file on the computer, for example. So let's just make a file be something that's can just be shared between computers. As long as my computers know that I'm the same person and have some way to talk to each other, they can just share all the changes to a file.
This is interesting because this is really a question of personal ownership. Like,
exactly.
In many ways, we seem to be moving as a society away from owning things. I mean, you even physically, like, you have Ubers instead of cars, and we always give our data away to every single company. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. Like, so much of our identity is just given away.
Yeah.
And in regards to, like, I have this bone to pick, because I try not to lie, but every time there's a terms and conditions statement, for instance, I'm essentially forced to lie because I'm not going to read the whole thing, and nobody should rightfully expect me to read the whole thing. And so I have to say that I've read the terms and conditions, and I mean, it's kind of just another, I feel like it's taking some of my autonomy away or something, like some of my personhood. Yeah. And this is what you're talking about as well. It's like big tech. I don't think it's something that anyone's doing on purpose, but it's kind of taking away pieces of our humanity in little ways.
Yeah. I mean, and if you actually read the terms of service, there's all sorts of awful stuff in there. Like, most of them say that they can just arbitrarily change the terms anytime they want without even telling you. So, like, what? Like,
you're gonna sign this contract, and I'm gonna write whatever I want in the contract after you sign it.
Yeah, in perpetuity. So later, after you sign it, I'm just gonna change the contract to say, by the way, like, all of your stuff's now my stuff, and also, like, you're required to, I don't know, like, eat the blood of 20 baby goats or something. And what, you're like, legally what? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think this is really odious for creative work. Like, I don't really care. I'm happy to, I mean, Uber's an awful company, but I'm happy to pay for taxis, and I don't own a car. But if I'm like looking here, because this is where my electric piano is, if I make some music, then that's not someone else's, that's mine. And, like, if I'm writing some code, that lives on my computer, and it's like beautiful that it's my code. It's beautiful that it's something that I have. I'm happy to keep a copy on GitHub, but the fact that it's like it's something that I've made. It's not something I've made thanks to the goodwill of Google Documents. It's like I have that kind of, like, I hate begging to be able to express myself. And that's how it feels when I use cloud services. I'm sort of like begging, like, oh, thank you Google Docs, in exchange for no money, but for looking at all my data. Yeah. You're giving me the permission, but only limited, and only until you don't want to, and I have no rights whatsoever. Oh, I have no rights, but thank you for letting me type my own thoughts into a text box that I want to keep. That's like my actual creative work that I care a lot about. Yeah. Like, what? No. That's mine.
Yeah, YouTube really pisses me off too sometimes, because, like, you have these creators who upload all of this stuff, and I mean, there's a fine line, right? Because some stuff the platform should be regulating, but they can just get their accounts completely shut down, or, like, they get demonetized for saying a naughty word within the first 10 minutes of the video. For some reason, that really matters, and so suddenly you're not making money from your own work anymore, and it's like your lifeline is completely connected to this company who doesn't even care about you, and the AI is making these decisions for the most part.
Yeah, there was a line someone said at Hacker News the other day that it's like cryptocurrencies are one by one discovering all the reasons for central currencies to exist. Like they're just slowly rediscovering, slowly and painfully, why finance and money works the way that it does. So, but I feel like tech is kind of like that. Like there's this sort of techno-utopian ideal of like, oh, we're just going to make our own thing and it's going to be great. It's going to be great by default because we made it. But actually, governance is really hard. Like governance is a problem that humans have been struggling to do for thousands of years, you know, and we've gotten a bit better at it. We've got some newer ideas. But what's the governance model on Facebook or Google or YouTube? It's essentially feudalism. Like it's you go into the city and here's the YouTube city. And the YouTube city is beautiful. There's all of this content and everything else. But who's in charge? Well, the king is in charge. Who's the king? Well, it's some engineers in Silicon Valley, but they're not really in charge. They don't like the idea of being in charge because they don't like to consider themselves as tyrants, but they are. So, but they kind of then like bless an artificial intelligence to be in charge on their behalf that's flawed in a million ways. So you're like allowed inside the YouTube city, and it's a nice city. But if you ever piss off the king, you know, by saying a naughty word in the first 10 minutes of your video, or whatever it is that the king doesn't like, then you're banned from the city forever. And you have no recourse. There's no one that you can appeal to. You violated the terms of service, according to the artificial intelligence. There was someone I watched the other day, it was an article, someone who makes video games. He like live streamed making video games from scratch. Really cool creator, really creative, interesting guy. Someone blackmailed him on YouTube saying, if you don't pay me money, I'm going to get me and some of my mates to all report your videos for violating the terms of service. So he said no. So they violated his videos for reporting terms of service. He appealed to YouTube. The YouTube algorithm like reinstated his videos. They banned his video again. They reinstated it. They reported his video again, and YouTube just left it off. So now one of the videos in the series of videos is gone from YouTube because some people decided to artificially use the tyranny of the of the AI to blackmail somebody that's creating really creative, like interesting stuff. And that's just a thing that just happened last week, right? So there's you. Well, if you don't like it, well, go somewhere else. Okay, we'll go over to Facebook. Facebook land, great. You know, everything's much better there. In Facebook land where any amount of nudity is banned, despite the fact that nudity is quite acceptable, say in Germany. But no, Germans aren't allowed to show nude photos of themselves to other Germans on Facebook because of the moral policing by some people in Silicon Valley, right? Because some people in Silicon Valley aren't comfortable with that. So therefore, in Germany. But then do we want the other way around? Do we want the people in Silicon Valley to have no impact? Well, then you look at somewhere like Myanmar with like WhatsApp, where people are using WhatsApp to organize like lynchings of people. But Facebook had like one person that spoke whatever language they speak. I don't even know what language they speak in Myanmar. They had like one person who was supposed to be regulating or maintaining or keeping an eye on all of this.
Just the whole country.
For the whole country. So like this, you know, there's a word for it. It's like we talk about it as the Wild West for good reason. Like it's a system with weak government, and when there is government, it's tyrannical. It's like we've sort of opened our eyes, and there's this new land that we've discovered, and it's full of trees and butterflies, and we can do anything there. And people have said, well, stuff this, you know, corporate blah blah blah, like civilization. I don't like governments. I'm going to make my own. I'm going to start my own country in this amazing new land.
It'll be easy. It'll be easy.
It'll be so easy. Yeah. So then they do. And they're like, well, there's no infrastructure. So they made their own infrastructure. Well, they've got to pay for the infrastructure somehow. So, well, I mean, Google and Facebook have to pay for the infrastructure somehow. Oh, well, I mean, people like free things. So let's just sell their data because that doesn't feel like an incursion. And we'll make this city. And we don't need governance. Like, we don't need democracy. There's no voting on Google's products for what the next features are. You know, there's no say. But that's okay because it's different this time somehow, right? So you know, it's like silly to even ask the question of where's the part where I vote inside Google or Facebook or Twitter or any of these other tech platforms. The idea of voting isn't a question that we ask, even though we think that we should vote in our physical places because there's a whole history of not voting and that being terrible. Well, now we've invented these new countries on the internet, like TikTok, but well, why would I vote there? Oh no, like it looks like people are blackmailing other people on YouTube. It looks like the Yelp mafia. People are going to restaurants and saying, "Give me free food, or I'm going to write a bad review for you on Yelp," and just getting away with it, right? Like, there's banditry and there's tyranny, and that's that's like what we've got. Well, why don't we have those things in the physical world?
There are bandits and Karens walking around every restaurant. Oh my god, that's the best.
It's a real thing. So, why don't we have banditry in the real world? Because we've got the courts, because we've got all these institutions, and the institutions to be really well designed and like honed over millennia. And like, they're not perfect. They're absolutely not perfect, but they're way better than what we've got on the internet. But because on the internet, we thought we didn't need any of that. Spoilers, we do. And, it's just going to take us another generation or two to realize it or something.
You're right. I mean, you started off by saying that the internet is feudalism, and you're absolutely right. Like, it's actually probably going to be up to us to move on to democracy next.
Right.
At some point.
Yeah, or maybe mob rule for a while. Like, I don't know. Like, do we go straight to democracy? It'd be nice if we do.
Democracy has this real issue of like, stupid people still vote, and I don't know how to. I mean, maybe they should. Like, I think that's kind of a slogan to say, like, stupid people vote, but maybe they have a deep wisdom to them that we should also acknowledge. Like, they still use the platform, and so if they're voting for their own interests, which makes sense.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, like, I don't know what that would even look like. The whole system. I mean, if you go back and look at the way that monarchy used to see itself, the idea was that the king or queen was bestowed their authority by God, so they're a representative of God, and officially the king or queen, like the monarchy, owned everything. They owned everything, and then they could essentially like let some other people be landowners, but ultimately the king or queen could take their land back if they really wanted to. So then people were nobles if they were landowners. That's what that meant. And then like the peasants, they were peasants and they were poor because they didn't own anything. So you were like renting. Your family could have lived in the same house for 6 generations, but you didn't own that house. The local lord owns the house, and then you have to pay a tithe to the local lord in exchange for being able to.
A monthly subscription.
You have to pay a monthly subscription to be able to use that piece of land. Exactly, right? So the idea of a peasant voting, well, they don't have any authority. Like, sorry, like voting, we don't care what you vote because you're a peasant. Like, we'll just kill you or kick you off the land if we don't like you, So it's not just like vote the way we want or we'll kick you off. It's we're not even interested in asking you the question because then you're just going to get uppity. And that's the situation that we're in tech right now. Voting doesn't make sense on Google Docs because you don't own anything.
Yeah.
Like, there's no reason why Google should listen to you. They don't care about you. You're one of 7 billion people. How many billion people on Google Docs? Like, if you kick up a fuss, they'd rather not have you as a customer than have to interact with you at all. Like, that's basically the situation, like, as a human.
It's tough because at the moment, I mean, there's this issue with Sam Harris had this. It was a terrifying to hear podcast about child sex abuse material on social media platforms. Just to take a fun tone, just a fun turn in this video. But essentially, he said that every single platform that has media sharing content has child sex abuse material. Like, there are every time, and so we're trying to get the governments, the real democracy, to step in and start regulating these big companies. But actually, that's really, really difficult. And there are all these issues with like privacy. Like, Facebook can't, an AI currently, I mean, maybe it can now, but when this was recorded a year ago or whatever, an AI couldn't just go in and look at a video and tell what the content was. And so if a video had already been flagged, it could find it again and delete it. But like, essentially, there's this big question of like, how much privacy should people have? Should an AI be able to go through and look at all their videos and read their search history, or not? And I mean, our tech overlords also have a lot of really difficult decisions to make.
Yeah, but to me, again, that's. I mean, you can look at the parallels in the physical world. So there's child abuse that happens. Well, I mean, governance is really hard. It's a really hard problem, right? Like, if I was president of America for a day, I don't know what I would do. I don't feel qualified to step into that role. I mean, like I might have some ideas, but it's almost too hard for one person to govern a country. It's like really hard. But what do we do? Well, we have the court system, for example, that says, hey, we've got the power to compel people to show up in a room, and we have people that we respect that have, there's a complex vetting process involving, going to law school and doing well at law school and blah blah blah. At least in Australia. In the US, judges are voted on, which is really weird. In Australia, judges are ex-lawyers. And then the judges have the power to be able to make rulings, like make decisions, not in general, but about this particular case. And then those rulings can be binding. Like this is the process. It's not a perfect idea, but it's the best we came up with. And and there's different ideas about common law systems and French legal systems and blah blah blah. But there's if you talk to a lawyer, like there's a history of law, like there's a history of the invention of these concepts and ideas. And we look at tech companies and say, hey, we're in this new land and there's child sexual abuse material going on. And Google says, like, we don't, or Facebook says, we care, but not that much, like, because these are hard questions about how do we want the governance to work in this space? And it's complicated. And right now it's complicated and you have no voice. So some people that have some incentives have all of the voice that there is, all of the power, and they make some set of decisions, and you don't like the decisions they make. Well, what's the other option? Well, leave. No, that doesn't really solve the problem. They could make better choices. I guess we could petition them to make better choices, which is what Sam Harris is doing. We could impose that. I mean, all of the digital atoms of, like, everyone that's on a digital platform is also in a physical country. So we can just compel Facebook using, like, we can kind of like grandfather in democracy to be able to have votes and have lawmakers make decisions in the real world, and then just have them enforce those decisions on Facebook.
I don't know. I mean, maybe that will work as to create an architecture framework, but like in reality, the law takes so long to pass, and computers are very, very quick. Like,
I don't even think that's the biggest problem. I just think that the lawmakers of physical worlds and physical space they're not really qualified to make decisions about how virtual spaces should work. They do work differently. There's a whole like, how many American senators use computers regularly the same way that that 20-something people do? Probably none of them, right? So, like, do we, like, I don't know that people that aren't citizens of the digital world should be making decisions on the digital world, but the people that are citizens of the digital world inside the digital world have no voice. They have no authority over that digital space itself. Like, I just think that we need to do something here. I think ideally what I want, if we could manage it, is I'd like a democracy inside the digital world as well, or inside different digital spaces, where people can have a voice, and the voice that they have is expressed through the way that the tools work and everything else. It's like a co-owned type system. And it sounds kind of communist to say it like that, but what I'm looking for is to fight back against the current, to use this terminology in this framing, the current system we have is feudalism. I want to move away from feudalism to something that's a bit more mature and a bit more grown up, where we can say, like, hey, there's a child sexual abuse problem in this platform. Let's, as a community, talk about it, and as a community, brainstorm and vote on what solutions we want. As a community, make the decisions about how our community should be governed. Because, like, at the end of the day, if I'm in community with you, say, like, we're in a community together, I think that we have a fundamental, I think right is the right word. I think we have a right to be able to decide collectively as a group and as a community how our community is governed, within some boundaries. So, there's I'm not religious, but there's a Planet Shakers, which is this sort of young evangelical church just out my window down there. And sometimes I watch them with my binoculars and make sassy comments to my girlfriend about it.
You watch them with binoculars?
Well, it's fascinating. You can kind of see, like, sometimes they're all going into Planet Shakers, and we play the game of, is that a person going to Planet Shakers? Like, do they have that vibe? There's a vibe. But they have a right to decide how their community works and what music's played and whatever else. And because they're part of a broader, larger society, we have coarser rights as a broader society to say that if there was, say, if a church in Australia happened to be have a bunch of sexual abuse going on in its walls, then we as a broader society have the right to be able to say, no, that's not okay. Your society, your community can't work that way. But that's a very coarse tool that we'd like to not use. And then the very specific thing should be very local and like hyper local. Like the community itself decides if they want to be meeting on Saturdays or Sundays. The community itself decides if anyone can say anything in the Zoom room that they've got, or if people have to raise their hands. The society can decide whether or not they're meeting in person and what their relationship with COVID is going to be up to a point and so on. But we need more of that, I think, in technology, in our digital solutions, where we have some of it, but like I can't change Google Docs' interface. I can't make my own software that interacts with Google Docs. In fact, it's really hard to make any software that is going to work in the collaborative kind of way that Google Docs works. No open source software that I know does that, or does it to that kind of extent. And I want to make that kind of software. Like I want the computers that we have to work that way. And from a technical front, that's entirely possible. Again, because everything we do on computers is all made up, and B, because there's been a bunch of work lately, and again, for the people that know my work, in the space of CRDTs, which is this set of technologies that lets us do, it stands for conflict-free replicative data types, replicated data types. But the basic idea is I can open up a document on my computer, I can make some changes. Then at some point, my computer can tell you and your computer about those changes. And you can also be concurrently making changes on your computer. And everything just magically syncs up. It all just works. And we don't need some central computer in the middle that makes all the decisions about how everything works out. Sometimes it's helpful to have a relay server or something, but ultimately the authority of what happens on our respective computers. And both my computer and your computer just have a history of all the changes that were made, and have some algorithms to merge all that in so that we can see a shared view of a document. And yeah.
Where are you working full time right now?
So I'm working with a guy Mike, and he, he's just paying me. There's nothing really commercial coming out of it, but I'm essentially working as a private research scientist, kind of thing. So yeah, he's started a little organization called the Invisible College. He wants to reclaim the spirit of independent science that happened hundreds of years ago at the invention of peer review, and have a bunch of people working in the shadows, doing science, inventing new things and making stuff. So yeah, so I've been working with him on that, and under the umbrella of this Braid project, which is an attempt to add real-time streaming into like HTTP protocols. But ultimately what I want to change computing like this, and I want to show people and build the technology so that we can have computers work like this. So.
How does changing the way science works mix in with this current changing the paradigm of computing thing?
Yeah, Mike's got a lot of opinions about this. There's a bunch of problems in modern science. Like there's the peer review system is weirdly cliquey. It's not public. It's not open.
It's terrible. Oh my God.
It's terrible. Yeah, right. Do you want to talk more about why
it's terrible? Sure. I got really into psychology for a while, and I was just reading all these papers, and I was like, oh my God, this is terrifying. Like our psychologists are being educated in this. And I mean, you would just see things. I would just read, and I'm not that good at math. Like I'm pretty bad at math, and I would just read these papers and I'd be like, did nobody ever teach this person math in there? And then other people reviewed this and the math was okay. Like these statistics are just completely made up. Like there's so much p hacking going everywhere and it's so obvious. And like, I mean, this is just in psychology, and then I'm supposed to believe that the rest of science is fine. I mean, I know psychology is a big problem, but like, I don't know. I think something like the majority of papers in psychology can't be replicated. So we've just wasted all of this money and all this time on papers that can't be done again, that are wrong. I mean,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and yeah, I've got a friend that's studying psychology, and she loves maths, and she's so mad about this that that like that she talks about statistics to psychology researchers, and they've got this look of horror on their face, like, oh no, someone's gonna but yeah, and here's the weird thing: you have that experience reading that paper. How do you provide feedback to the author? How do you express that opinion in a public way that other people that come back and read that paper later can read?
There's no way.
There's no way. Like if I post
go on.
if I post something on Reddit, then lots of people can comment on that thing. And later, if someone Googles it, the Reddit post might pop up and people can read all of those comments. There's nothing like that in science.
We need a Reddit for science. I've
Yeah.
had this concept with this idea a while ago, and it was just kind of out of my grasp to make. But we need a Reddit for science that's open, that anyone can just read. Because you know what? When I want to read scientific articles, I have to go ask my friend who's, you know, in the science world, and she has to give me her login to get access to the science articles, and then I have to go and see them. But most people don't have that, or don't think of that, or don't want to.
They don't have that. They don't think of that, and also the papers aren't very good. And also, even once you got that login, you can't comment on anything, and or upvote or downvote or anything. Like, it's just stuck in the Middle Ages. You know, that's how it feels.
So we have the science community, but actually the public can't even see it. Like, we don't have a community really, but even like the public doesn't have access to science. So it's behind a giant wall that you need to pay $200,000 to access, because you need to go to a university, and you know, maybe not $200,000 if you're in a good country, but yeah, you need to spend a bunch of time and just to get the login to access science. Why isn't science available for everyone?
Yeah, we all pay for it, by the way. It's paid out of our tax dollars, so it's a bit weird that we can't all read the work that we've paid for already. Like, but there's that, and then the other aspect of it is sorry, I had like 6 hours sleep last night. My brain's blanking out. Yeah, so all of that's going on, and the experience as a scientist also sucks. Like, it sucks on both sides. For scientists, they're constantly under pressure to be applying for 1 million grants. And then once they get a grant, then the grant isn't for them being themselves. It's for some work that they're supposed to discover. But the process of discovery is one where the question that you ask at first isn't the question that you've answered by the time you finish the work. Like, the actual experience. Which is a really interesting talk the other day, and he was saying that we've got the idea of writing as a scientist. It was a talk about how to write as a scientist, and he made this really interesting point that the writing that you do for the writer, for you explaining your own ideas to yourself and getting clarity on your own ideas, is a different intent than the idea of the writing that you do for other people. When you're writing for someone else, you want to write the things that are going to be useful for them to read, that they're going to find useful and they're going to want to read. And that's, like, often if you're doing work and coming up with ideas, the last idea that you come up with might be, oh, this is how it all fits in a nice coherent way, and this is how I can explain it. Well, that's the first idea that you'd say if you're writing for someone else. You know, it's kind of an obvious idea, but like, the experience as these scientists, they have a miserable time. It's not fun. And the outcome is supposed to be these papers that is what then stuck behind a paywall that no one can read, and that a few people are going to read and review, and they're going to, like, not really review it properly, and you don't know how to do the mathematics, and no one there's supporting you to do the maths, because scientists are actively, essentially, like, in a lot of ways, disincentivized from working with one another, because they don't want to have a super long authors list and be diffusing the, you know, the credit for the work. It's really silly. Like, it's funny you're bringing this up and talking about a Reddit for science. Literally right before this call, I was on another call with the Braid Research Group, where Mike, the guy that I'm working with, was proposing and showed some mock-ups and there's working prototype that he's been working on exactly to make a Reddit for science and what that could look like. And he's got a whole lot of ideas, and there's all sorts of things going on there. But there's a small and growing community talking about the idea of micropublication. And this comes out of, I feel like there's two different ways I can, like, talk about this. One is from the individual perspective, and there's this small community that's been using Roam research and tools like that, and they've been discovering, this is a scientist, working scientists, realizing that actually a paper is too big. Like, a paper has a lot of things in it. It's got a hypothesis, it's got an abstract, it's got some experimental methods, then it's got some experimental results, then it's got a conclusion that uses those experimental results to tell the story that the academic wants to be writing about. But that's too many things. So the idea is, while you're writing it, then each experiment that you do, you write up as its own publication. The publication is, we did this experiment, like, here's the experimental methodology, and here's some results. And if you want to be even smaller, you could say, here's an interesting experiment to run, and then so you publish that immediately. And after you've run the experiment, you publish another thing that's, oh, here's the results that we got when we ran that experiment. And then, of course, if you want to, you can also run the experiment, and you can link to the experimental model and design, and you can have your own research, like your own results, published separately. So then now I want to write a paper, and I might look at a few different experimental results, all their own publications, and make some claim. So maybe I've made a claim. I've got some hypothesis. I think this thing might be true. Okay. And then later I can say, hey, I think there's decent evidence for it being true. I'm just going to link to all of these different experimental results that maybe other people have accumulated in response to this claim. And here's the conclusion that we reach. And then 5 years pass. Well, there's been more experimental results, and it turns out the claim doesn't really hold with the newer results. But because each of those individual experimental results is its own linkable article, its own thing, a new conclusion can come out, and the new conclusion can say, hey, looking at even more of these results, we drew a different conclusion, and here's what the conclusion is. But all of those results, all of them get cited by all of those different places. So as an experimentalist, like as a scientist, it's like one of the things that gets bandied about is this idea of the gratitude graph, that whenever I do work, I want to express gratitude to some other people that whose work have let me do this work, who have supported me along the way. And they could be people that either help me, that I'm explicitly linking to. Here's some people that did some experimental results that I'm actively using for my conclusion. Or they could be other people that supported me in editing this work, or in helping frame it, or in whatever else it is. So I express gratitude to them, and they express gratitude to some other people, and through their own work. And we end up with this graph of gratitude, where gratitude flows towards people that deserve gratitude. And then the question is, who as a society do we feel grateful towards? Well, the people doing the work are expressing who they feel grateful towards. This is the people that make the science happen. This one person, Cheryl's great, because look at all these different scientists who are all independently saying that they feel gratitude towards Cheryl for allowing them to do their work. So, so then the question of funding is like, well, maybe funding should follow the gratitude graph. Maybe it should do something else. But, that's that later question.
That's it's brilliant. But there's also, so you wouldn't call it a gratitude graph, but there's also something that I've thought of that's fairly similar, where you have, let's say you publish an article and a bunch of people rate it down, so it gets 1 star out of 5. But then somebody else cites your article. So there's this issue where if I'm reading an article, it might cite 200 studies. I don't have time, and I shouldn't be expected to read every study, all of the 200 studies, and assess whether or not they're legitimate, whether their math is good. Like, nobody has the time to do that. And then they also cite studies, right? And so we should probably have some sort of graph that shows, like, okay, here are all the studies that this guy cited. How well rated are all of those studies? So like, if he's citing 200 studies, but 50 of them have like 1 star, well, maybe his math is a little funky somewhere, maybe his conclusions aren't quite correct here. And like, we don't have a way to do that. I would read studies in psychology where it's clearly just one person and all of their friends are kind of converging around this one idea, and they're all doing research about this one idea and then citing each other, and like, they work in the same department. It's like, can we there's no outside influences. It's just these guys and their friends. And
do you know the idea of a Sybil attack?
No.
This is an old attack that shows up in some cryptography systems and whatnot. Anytime you build a distributed reputation system, the danger is that I write a short computer program that just invents 100,000 fake people that all say that I'm a really great guy.
Yeah.
That's a Sybil attack, right? And they can all say that each other are great too, right? Like, they can build whatever networks they want to make it look like it's a network of real people. But, but if I'm doing it like with some outcome, that's a Sybil attack.
I had an idea about that as well. So in this imaginary Reddit for science thing, I was going to do commenters who are scientists have their comments have a different weight than commenters who are regular people. So regular people can't rate how good a paper is. And for instance, like the physics community, there might be quantum physicists, and I don't know anything about physics, but I shouldn't have chosen that. I should have chosen like the biology. You have biomedical, and then you have like zoology or whatever. The zoology community might not want biomedical people to comment and be able to rate the zoology articles because maybe they're too specialized. And so the zoology community says, okay, only zoologists can rate these articles. And maybe the biomedical people say, well, zoologists can rate biomedical articles. I don't know. It's like up to the. And no, so, and then you would have to give some sort of proof of that you are a scientist, like your ID or something. And then if you do something fucky, we just ban you.
Yeah. These are all. I really like the convergence here, because a lot of the things that you're talking about are things that people in the community are already talking about. There's a thing called I can't remember what it's called, Octopus or something. There's some like scientist ID website that you can register on, and then you just have an ID, and then you can link that ID to all the different papers you do. So that's the thing. There's also something that Mike and Kat in the Invisible College are talking about, is this idea of subjective peer review. So it's peer review, but it's subjective in the context of my community or something. So I can say like, hey, I really like this, but I can say I really like this, but you can decide whether or not you trust me as to whether or not it's a good thing or not. So you and your community, right, your community of zoologists, then you know a bunch of other zoologists that you respect. And then the peer review is not what random people think of this paper, it's what the people in your trust network think about this paper. So, you know, and maybe the people that are in your trust network, maybe also some people that they trust or something, but with lower weighting or whatever. But the idea is that all the data about who likes what and who likes who can, you know, this is the thing that I'm a bit iffy about. If that's all public, then it means that you can have whatever algorithm you want to be able to up and downvote things in total. You can see that algorithm because here's all the individual piece of data that it's aggregating, saying, well, you know, you've explicitly said that you trust like these 8 people, and these 8 people trust like these other 50 people, and you don't trust anyone beyond 2 steps because that's the algorithm that you've decided on. And then here's like how that collective group of people rates this paper, and you might see a different rating for that paper from me and my biomedical community, because, you know, all the biomedical people think that the biomedical ideas inside this paper aren't very good. We've all rated it down on that behalf, but your community thinks that zoology stuff in it's pretty good, so they've rated it up, and that's fine. You know, like that's the idea of, it's like not just, there's not an objective way to rate something, but if a human being is rating it, then, you know, it's like if you trust me and I trust the paper, I like the paper, then in that case, that's what causes it to be voted up in your feed.
That's brilliant. I mean, yeah, I would like to talk to the people from the Invisible College. They sound like excellent people.
I think you should. After you talked a few weeks ago, and I said I'd get you in contact with them, and then forgot to follow up. And I'm reminded that would be a great idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the biggest problems here that I don't think people realize is that journals are I mean, they're mega corporations. Like I think I read somewhere, I don't know how true this is today, but at least a few years ago, they were making more profit than any company in the world. Like their profit margins are massive because essentially what they do, I don't think people realize this, they might charge a university $1 million a year to access their journals. And like, that's not a crazy number. This isn't something I picked out of the air. It's probably more now. But every university is paying somewhere around $1 million to access these journals. And there are like 2 or 3 kind of titans, like Elsevier is one. And so they have you as a scientist, you publish work. You don't get paid to publish the work. You just publish it because you need it for your academic advancement. And then you have an editor, and I guess the editor is sometimes the reviewer is sometimes paid, but oftentimes reviewers are not paid. And then the editor, I think, is paid. Is that?
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. So the journal pays the editor. That's the one thing that's the one piece of value they provide.
Okay. They edit your work. Great. Excellent. They do the copy editing. Someone on Freelancer could do that for $50, but that's okay.
Yes.
So they are public. They're it's a great equation, and they've done a great job with it because they're getting $1 million a year from every university. Think of how many universities there are, and they're paying editors and then like, you know, the CEO and some other people, but they have very, very light staff, and the people making content for them are doing it to keep their jobs. That's all. That's the only reason, because if they don't do it, they get fired.
Yeah, and they're being paid out of the public purse. So, the America, Australia, lots of countries will fund the research itself through grants programs. So the journals don't have to pay for any of the research. They just get it for free and then sell it back to you for ridiculous profits. That's their entire model. Great model. Did you know this? I don't know if you've read. If you look at the original memo that Tim Berners-Lee wrote when he was inventing the web at CERN, the original idea was for academic papers. It was like, hey, let's have this idea of a document, and the document can link to other things, and each of those can also be documents that can link to other places and other things. That's a cool idea. That's how like science kind of already works, but let's make it so that each of those references, you can just click on it, and then it takes you there. And I find it just the most hilariously ironic thing that basically the web has eaten the entire world except for science.
Yeah.
You know, like what?
We're gonna do everything except that one thing we made it for.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right.
Good, good. And then scientists, they really get the short end of the stick, because oftentimes they have a pet interest, and if you're a biomedical researcher, you might be interested in sleep or sex or some weird drug that your cousin had, or some weird disease that your cousin had, and you have to go into cancer or heart disease because that's what we're paying for with our grants. And on top of that, I mean, replication is a big deal, because we should be able to replicate a study. We should be able to see if it works, so we should be able to do it again. But nobody cares about, like, you don't get a lot of reputation gain for doing replication studies. And so we have all these people trying to do all this new research when there's this giant backlog of research that hasn't been touched because nobody wants to be the replication guy because there's no funding for it. And it's I mean, we should be, I think this is kind of a twofold problem because I think nowadays, if you had a Reddit for science, we could probably, if you have a methodology, you could videotape you could just take your phone out and video yourself doing a lot of the experiments. I mean, sometimes, it might not be that possible, but if you're like doing a very specific thing in a chemistry lab, you could film yourself and edit the video and put it up, and then it might be a lot easier to see what your methodology is and actually prove that you have done the thing that you said you were doing.
And people do that. Like I follow a few, I mean, guilty pleasures of watching a few different YouTubers that review tech products and things because I'm a big nerd. And it's quite fun watching their methodologies because they're actually often better than a lot of scientists do. Like there's a couple different YouTubers that I watch that review like computer gadgets and equipment and benchmarks and stuff. And the way that they do their benchmarking and the statistics about that is very rigorous. It's good. It's like like science approved, and we have this idea that science is this thing that this is something else Mike rants about a lot, that science is something that happens in the hoity-toity, like, oh, well, no, you've got to be an officially recognized blessed scientist. Like, no, science was never that. Science originally, like, it was a bunch of people in their homes who happened to be independently wealthy doing interesting things and then sharing them. That's what it was. Like the original Invisible College is an idea from, I don't know the history of it, but what eventually became the Royal Society in the UK. And it was essentially just people doing interesting and cool things, then showing up in a meeting once a month and speaking to everybody, saying, this is what I did. Here's some notes. Here's the paper, the piece of paper that describes it. But I'm going to demo it live on stage and tell everybody about it. And then they just do that. They just like had this little community where they were doing interesting things and they shared them. And then that was where science, like that's a lot of the modern idea of science, where that came from. But now it's sort of been, I don't know, like whisked away behind the secret lab where you've got to have a lab pass. And, there's all these, like I was talking to someone in the Invisible College like community the other day about it. And he was saying how funny it is that a lot of the sense of community in modern science groups comes in, say, you go to a conference and it's the conversation at the pub at the conference where you really get the lowdown in a way, Jeremy really doesn't like Joe's latest paper and he thinks his work's crap and blah, 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 right? And this is the conversation about whether or not this other person's work is worthwhile and why he likes and doesn't like it and blah, blah, blah. And these are pretty small communities. But one of the problems that modern science has is it's very exclusive. There's a very thick wall, right? If you're not invited into that room, you cannot see inside that room. And I just don't think that really stands in the modern world where we've got Reddit and we've got Happy News and everything else. Like, look at the way open source software is made these days. I don't know if everyone knows this. Almost all of it's on GitHub, so that's a whole thing, but we can put that aside. But I make a project, I put it up online. I put it up online before it even works. No one cares, right? Don't worry, no one's gonna care if you put up crap software on GitHub. That's the reality of it. So you put up your project and then, then you work on it if you want or not. And there's not like upvotes and downvotes. People can star your project, which means literally nothing. Or there's an issue tracker. So you can go on anyone's project and just hit the new issue button and say, oh, I ran into this problem. Or like, oh, I like pineapple on my pizza. And then they'll delete it or whatever. And the issue tracker is just a conversation. It doesn't do anything. But you can see if you're curious the number of open issues and whatever. And then the software can get better or not. And people can take anyone else's work and fork it. And forking is let's say you're working on something, I hit the fork button, and now I've got a copy of your project. So I can't edit your project unless you let me, unless you give me permission. But I can fork it, and as soon as you fork it, I've got a copy of it, and I can obviously just edit my copy all I like. And that's got the full history of all of your changes. So it's not like I'm not pretending that I wrote it. It's got the full history, including changes that I made by other people. But I can just make changes in my own fork. And then, if I want, I can do what we call a pull request, saying I request that you pull some changes that I've made into your version of the code. Because everyone's actually looking at your version of the code still. So I just request that you pull in the changes that I've made. So that's like all of the pieces. And then it's not some like hoity-toity like, I think Joe's work's crap, but I'm going to tell you about it at the pub only after a few drinks because it's a bit spicy. It's like, I want this for papers. Here's a paper. Here, I did some work. Like, I published these results. Great. Here's an issue tracker. Here's a bunch of problems. Here's a bunch of people that know what they're talking about the problems they have with it, and talking about the things they like about it. Like, this is great work, but I actually think that on paragraph 3, the way that you described it doesn't really make much sense. Yeah, thanks for that. I'm going to go and fix the typo. I'm going to fix the typo in my own paper because, like, after it's published, because we're not printing things on dead trees, like, we can just do that. Like, thanks. Hey, like, how did that methodology work? Well, this is what I actually did, right? Or I don't reply. And people, you get a sense, like, if there's a maintainer and there's all these open issues and they're not responding to anything, often someone else will just fork it and say, okay, cool, I've got a new copy of this and I'm just going to maintain it. And then, they can clean it up or fix it or do whatever they want with it. But it's like, it's just a bazaar. It's a bazaar with lots of things. And there's obviously discovery problems and so on. But, there's no reason why science couldn't be like that. And from a funding perspective, I think it would be lovely at some point if we can have a UBI of some sort. I think it's a great idea. One of the reasons I really want that, I was talking to a friend of mine. She's a speech pathology researcher. God, one of the most lovely human beings that you'll ever possibly meet. I met her doing swing dancing, which is great. And she's done work with a few different big venues to help them do with hearing impaired people to be able to, help like the MCG type places be accessible. And and she's working at a university, but she doesn't get any money whatsoever. She doesn't get paid at all from doing these projects. People just ask her, and then they've got some money, but then the university takes all of it, blah, blah, blah. And then it's a whole thing. She wants to do this work. She just wants to do this work. She loves it. She cares about it. She cares deeply about it. But she's got to spend a whole lot of her time begging for funding and begging to fund the things that she cares about and justify them. She would I want a UBI for her because I want her to just be free, to just ask what comes next each day and what way it makes sense for her to show up in the world and provide value in whatever form providing value looks like for her. And I want her to be free to do that without needing anyone else's permission to do that. And I know, I'm utterly convinced that the work that would come out of her feeling that freedom inside of herself and then just doing the things that it showed up for her to do, I think the work would be significantly better, far in excess of the number of dollars that it would cost for her to have a UBI. Because
not to mention that the amount of time every day or every week she spends begging for money, like those 10 hours or whatever it is, writing up a grant application, she could just spend that doing her job. It's just a complete waste of everyone's time to pay her hourly to write up grant applications so she can be doing the things she hates doing. She's whipping herself probably trying to figure out the best wording for this grant.
Oh, I'm sure. And then I'm sure the 10 hours of actual work writing needs another 10 hours of recovery time for all the emotional effort of doing that. And then someone's got to read all the grant applications and decide who gets love and who gets kicked out of the, off the island. I was in the US. I lived in the US for a couple of years, about a decade ago, and I went to a talk. I was in the Bay Area, and this company doing they do genetic screening, and they've got a whole bunch of AI people, and so they wanted to be able to bill, right? Like do billing for this, obviously through the American health system. And he just threw out this stat. He said that every hour that a human being spends in a consult with a doctor, there's another 2.7 hours of administrative overhead in the American medical system. Isn't that amazing?
Well, I mean, it makes sense. That's why it's probably one of the reasons why everything is so expensive.
Yeah. But you spend an hour with a doctor. There's another 2.7 hours being spent by people on the phone with each other, trying to figure out who to bill, the insurance side figuring out if they can get away with not paying, and writing up, all of this stuff. 2.7 hours. Can't you automate it? can't you just make it? No, they can't, because it's, I don't know, who knows why, right? Because it's too crafty and clunky.
Well, this is the issue. Like, one of the issues that I have with government is that I don't know, this seems to be like both a left and a right issue, and it's that government is slow and inefficient in so many different ways. It's so inefficient, and like I don't know if I want smaller government, but I certainly want a government that doesn't waste all of my fucking money all of the time. I have a friend who worked for the trains, and like she updated their website or whatever, and she said that she worked like 2 hours a day because that's all the work they would give her, and then she spent the rest of the time learning Japanese and drawing and all sorts of fun things. But and one time the train services, they gave, and they would like pay for taxis to get everyone to a certain location that they didn't really need to go, and then at some point, because you can't install an app in your phone for your job, they gave everyone new iPhones, and it was like 500 people, and so $1,000, I don't know, so they spent $500,000 on iPhones that nobody really needed. Like, they were just throwing money. The government seems to do this all the time. Like, it's just like, because a corporation has, they have, I mean, like it or not, they have shareholders, they have people who are trying to make profit, and so they say, well, I don't want to be wasting all this money that could go into my pocket, and so let's tighten things down. And you know, it's not very efficient. Bigger corporations have issues, but like the government can just ask for more money, and not only that, but they have all these budgets, and so they don't want to go under budget because then they won't get as much money next year, so they have to spend it all on fucking chairs or like wall hangers for pictures. I don't know, they just spend all this money on iPhones. And like, I mean, this seems like one of the biggest issues that we could just tackle with automation nowadays.
Yeah, well, I don't think we can. I'm worried, because the problem is that the problem isn't an automation problem. It's an accountability and understanding problem. Mm-hmm. It's like, I don't see that as a problem at the low level, which I think automation's great at. It's a problem at the high level of conceptualizing the entire space to be able to make better decisions. And I mean, this is what, as you say, this is what capitalism's great at. Capitalism's great at actually giving people accountability to, like, to the shareholders, but also to be fiscally responsible. And it still falls down in large companies. Like, large companies have exactly the same budgeting problems, and they have that because it's like the accountability doesn't creep in or something. And you want some tension with that. Like, you want some amount of freedom. Like, I want my friend to just do whatever she wants to do, and I also want, companies, I want the government to be efficient and use my tax dollars efficiently and not waste all of it on dumb crap, and pork barreling and corruption and things. But yeah, I don't know, it's hard. It's hard. I hear you.
So you mentioned Hacker News before.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm curious about it because, I mean, I use Reddit, and essentially it seems to be the same kind of formatting as Reddit, but they haven't switched over. What about it? Why is it its own kind of social media platform?
I don't know. I mean, I think Hacker News existed before Reddit, so it's a bit older. But yeah, it's just a bit different. It's got a different flavor. And like, speaking of different communities, I think different communities have their own culture. And Hacker News is, I mean, it's moderated by people at Y Combinator, and it's run by Y Combinator.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's sort of the go-to place, originally at least, for a lot of the community around the Silicon Valley startup scene. That's kind of its heart. But it's its own thing. And like, I find there's something that people underestimate, like massively underestimate, which is the effect of culture in spaces like that. Like, on Reddit, there's kind of the culture is like, oh, well, anyone can say anything, obviously. And then you've got to be like a bit, it's got to be pretty on the nose for a comment to get deleted. That's a big step by the moderation team. Hacker News has much more of a expectation. It's not just it's not politeness. It's like a good comment on Reddit might be a one-line quippy funny comment that would get downvoted to oblivion on Hacker News. And things that are downvoted get grayed out, so people you can't really read it unless you select it. That's Hacker News' culture. Hacker News' culture is like, a good comment on Hacker News is maybe a couple paragraphs, but you're going to make a point. You're going to have an opinion. And often, I mean, like, Hacker News also has its own childish flavor. Its childish flavor is you've got to be a bit, you think that you know what you're talking about. Actually, the truth is this thing. That's the that's the quintessential. Me and one of my friends sometimes talk about like the right kind of bait for Hacker News in the comment section. You've got to say, oh well, I read your article, and I can see why you think that, but actually, if you knew as much as I did, so yeah.
Well, that's funny because on Stack Overflow, it seems like a lot of the comments that I've seen are kind of brutal. Like I don't know if it's the autism and just the lack of like self-awareness, but sometimes you just see comments that just destroy someone.
Yeah. Well, Stack Overflow, the Joel Sporsky, the original design team of Stack Overflow, there's this fantastic talk, if you're curious, where they talked about the philosophy behind Stack Overflow. And when they made it, at the time there was Yahoo Answers and there was a couple other things. And they were like, no. Who is Stack Overflow for? So I'm going to ask you this. Who is the Stack Overflow question and answer for?
I mean, engineers or people learning about engineering?
Yeah, but do you think it's for the people writing the question? Or for the people answering it? Or
probably for people reading the question.
Exactly, yeah. So everything about Stack Overflow is optimized for the person Googling the question, wanting to have a good experience, where they see someone asking a question, they can figure out what the problem they have, and then seeing the top answer that's been accepted, and reading that and being enlightened. So everything about the site is about that. So questions, if there's two questions about the same thing, then one of them is going to get deleted. If there's multiple answers, but they're devolving into a conversation, the whole thread's going to get deleted. It's going to be deleted by the moderators. It's considered bad form. Answering questions, they gamify that. So you can get points by answering questions. And if your questions get upvoted and accepted, then you get special points. And as you get more points, you get more permission to be able to moderate Stack Overflow. And then the people asking the question, maybe they get an answer out of it. But if you ever try and ask a question on Stack Overflow, there's so many fields saying like, hey, you start typing it and they've got an AI that says, hey, are you sure your question's not the same as any of these 8 other questions that sound the same as yours? And things like that. So, yeah.
It has a template, like, what have you tried already? Like
right.
all these different things, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what Stack Overflow is as a site. And that's how it ends up how it is. But it's, I don't know. I just think a lot about that question of culture. I mean, it comes back, there's this thread through a lot of the things that we've been talking about of how are the people that are showing up seeing the space? Like, what's the stories that they're telling themselves? And, if you use Google Docs or talk to Google engineers, who, by the way, I worked at Google for a little while. The people that I worked with at Google are fantastic human beings. I adore them. Some of the most thoughtful and insightful and caring people that I've ever been able to work with. But the way that they're seeing the world is of this idea of like, well, we're the people that understand technology and we understand it really well. So we're going to build something that we're going to hope people want to use and that's going to be useful because we deeply understand the technology. And of course you can trust us. I mean, have you met Fred? Fred's a great guy, like what's the problem, right? And the median age at Google, I'm not sure what it is now, but when I was there, I think I was about 28 or 26 when I was there. And I was older than the median age at Google. So,
okay. Yep.
Like, this is a bunch of, and again, it's probably aged, over time, but in my head, I imagine a bunch of 25-year-old, mostly men who, mostly like the kinds of people that end up as programmers, making decisions based on the way that they're seeing the world. And how do they see the world? Well, every answer is found in code because that's what we're good at. And how do we do governance? I don't know. Let's build an artificial intelligence to do it. It's fine. And how are the people on Reddit seeing things? Oh, well, we're this kind of, I don't know, it's kind of wasting time. It's kind of trying to be funny. And there's a sort of game about it. And I guess we want some loose moderation. And then people have opinions about things and react to them strongly. And then how are people in Hacker News thinking about it? It's, I want to be seen as someone who's clever. That's that feeling. I want to be seen as someone who's clever, that gets upvoted because I have clever ideas and I'm, whatever. So comments often end up, or conversations and disagreements are often about who's the cleverest rather than trying to find some answer.
There's this cultural idea that isn't very kind, and maybe there is a kinder way to think about it, or a better way to think about it. But people like you, and even Hacker News in itself is kind of the intelligentsia, as you would say, of society. And unfortunately, or fortunately, or just realistically, these are the people who are controlling society in many ways. Not like a reptilian agenda, sort of everyone, they're controlling us, but more of the smartest people are the ones who dictate the culture. And it's not just Google, it's also like Kanye West, and he's brilliant in his own way. And so when you are talking on Reddit, I'm sure Reddit has a higher average IQ because it's mostly a lot of reading and writing and stuff, but like you're kind of talking to pretty normal people. But when you're on Hacker News, the culture is intelligentsia culture. Like if you are on Hacker News, you're probably at least one standard deviation above the general intelligence. And so the culture is different. And then when you make content, Seph, like, although you don't post very much, which I want to I wanted to grill you about, because it's not like one post a year, and it's like you're getting to the top page of Hacker News, but you're not really talking to the general public. And okay, I guess this is more related to something that I've been dealing with, which is YouTube comments. Like there are hateful comments, and I'm trying to figure out a way to categorize them in my mind. And I've realized, like, Lex Friedman made this comment the other day on Joe Rogan about, and it was like clipped and put on Reddit. And he made this comment about how we should be listening to flat earthers because they're telling us that there is essentially a fundamental mistrust of science in the community, right, in the wider community. And every single comment in that thread was like, but flat earthers are jerks, and they're like, yeah. And it was like, but I guess actually Lex isn't really talking to Reddit. He's actually talking to more Hacker News, or he's talking to the intelligentsia. He's talking to the scientific community and telling them what they need to hear.
Yeah. One of the reasons I think about that, if Earth were like Jupiter question, is because back in the day, I mean, like, let's say the founding of the United States as a country, it was a bunch of people that felt disaffected in the countries they were in and thought, hey, let's go to this new land and make something better, right? So there was the borderers, right? The people that were on the border between England and Scotland, who were constantly getting raided by the people from England or Scotland and attacked. And then the people that would come and attack them and, steal their stuff would then nip off across the border. So this happened for like 400 years or something. And then England, after they became more wealthy, realized there was this, and then Great Britain, they unified. There was this band across the country which had way lower literacy rates, higher absentee rates, higher crime, all these problems. So of course, America ran an advertising campaign to convince all these people to move to Ireland, which some of them did. And Ireland had an advertising campaign to try and get them all to move to America. And they settled in the Appalachian Mountains and became,
No way!
This is a real thing. Yeah. I mean, this is based off.
Okay.
This is all based off of me reading a book review of from Slate Psychotics about Albion Seed. So there's like this group, and then there's the group of people that were like essentially displaced nobles and felt like they didn't like this whole democracy thing, and they wanted to be able to go back to being nobles. So they settled, like Louisiana, and got slaves, and they ran plantations, and they got to be nobles again, and and so on, right? And then there were people that wanted to be able to religiously persecute people some more. And so then they settled in Boston and had laws like wasting time is a crime because it blasphemes against the time that God gave you, and so on. And they were the people that invented the school system. Like the idea of public schooling was invented by it. So this is like some people that left and then formed a new country. Yeah. Right now we've got a problem, which is all of the places are taken. Like all of the places that people could live already have people living in them. Mm. So I feel like, I mean, like if you think back to the tribal days of humans being like living in hunter-gatherer tribes, across all the continents that we now live in, then there was a point, right? So how big are the tribes? Well, often somewhere between 25 and 50 people. What happened after that? Because people kept making babies, right? Probably what happened is there would be some internal conflict inside the tribe, and instead of them resolving it because they're tight-knit enough and they know each other enough, that factions would form. And when the factions formed, they would split off sometimes and form a new tribe. Be like, screw you guys, we're all going to go over here and don't follow us because, this is going to be our place now. And sometimes they'd war and fight and whatever else. But there's an instinct in us. So you can imagine this like this push and pull. One is a pull towards being in community with each other and understanding each other's perspective and wanting to take the time to grow and learn together and help each other and have policies at a governmental level that work for everybody and so on. And then there's another instinct inside of us, which is very healthy, which is, you know what? I actually don't want to be in community with these people. I'd rather go to war with them than be in community with them. I don't want to listen to what they have to say because I think they're assholes. And I don't think they think about what I have to say. I just don't feel like we're of the same kin. I don't feel kinship with them. And I think one of the problems that you're talking about is that we have that kind of breakdown at the moment in society where what you want to make a country in the United States with these very different social groups that kind of hate each other. Like, let's be real, they hate each other. And they're being kind of forced into being in a country together, but they sort of don't like, they feel oppressed by one another. Everyone in the kind of liberal left wing, blah blah blah, right? Felt oppressed by Trump being president. They hated him, right? Hate him. I think he's obnoxious. I'm in this group, and then the people, like largely like kind of Bible Belt America, which I mean, Joe Rogan has a lot of people in this community in his audience. Well, from their perspective, like
Biden is hiding children under that pizza shop, and
yeah, Obama's not even a real American, and but like this is the dismissive way to describe it. The experience they have is they feel like the people that live in the cities, the city coastal elites that have been to colleges and universities, they hate them and they don't care about them at all. And you look at things like Flint, Michigan, where one city in America had lead in their drinking water, like the water was undrinkable for about 9 months or however long it was. It was like, I don't know, a long time, and people didn't care. Like people on the coast didn't care and didn't step in to try and fix or to help at all. And they feel like they just get ignored and get like crapped on and made jokes about and told they're racists while they've got real problems going on. And that's a real thing. That's like real grievance that's there. And these people, insofar as they're in different communities, like what Lex Friedman was saying in that clip that you're talking about, he's saying like, hey, if we're going to be a country together, then we need to listen to each other. And I think he's right. But
our instincts are telling us not to be in a country together.
Right, exactly. It's just that we can't do that because there's no more countries that we can go and colonize.
And not only that, but like, so I guess up until the 90s or so, we kind of didn't have a choice. And now with the internet, we have formed our own countries. I mean, we've all we have self-selected into our own countries. And now we're living in our own countries on the internet. But in reality, we have to go and have Christmas dinner with our uncle who we hate. and it's kind of the internet and reality kind of conflict in this very big way.
Yeah, well, on the internet, we've got as much space as we want. We've got as much space as we have engineers capable of building things, in a sense. So it's very easy to build things on the internet and have no one show up and no one use the thing that you built because there's just so much space. Maybe you've just found some place that no one else wants to join you in. But yeah, exactly. Like, I don't think it conflicts. It's just that the internet is like Jupiter. I mean, it's got infinite space for more websites. And insofar as that's true, then the problem is that, exactly as you say, we can have conservative Reddit and like left-wing and right-wing Reddit, left-wing and right-wing Twitter. And we can, and if Twitter doesn't like right-wing Twitter being there, well, then maybe all the right-wing people make their own Twitter. And the more that things like that happen, then the more that we're not one nation, we're not one people, we're not one country, we're not one world, we're not one global community. We're a bunch of different communities that have different perspectives and tell different stories. And I don't think there's anything fundamentally unhealthy about that. Obviously, if the United States split into several countries, then they would all be militarily significantly weaker. But culturally, that might make more sense. There's a lot of pressure in the UK. Scotland very, very closely lost a referendum on independence just before Brexit happened. And there's an open question of if and when that referendum happens again, does the UK fall apart as a country, which we may well see in our lifetimes. But it's exactly the same, question of do we want to be in community with each other? And the uncomfortable fact in the United States is that everyone in America has to collectively come together to decide on who's president. And that's very sad for people because they feel like, it's like it's team red versus team blue. And it's like two groups fighting to be the one that gets to oppress the other group. It's something I'm actually, one of the reasons why I live in Australia. There's so much interesting things going on in the States. So many people that I really admire and respect and look up to. And I live in Australia, and that's a very intentional choice, having tried it for 2 years. And in Australia, I can watch Q&A, and there'll be people on the left and people on the right that'll show up to be in that room together and sit next to each other and talk and answer the same set of questions from the same set of concerned voters. And, there's a conversation going on there.
It's wild. Like, the US is like everyone has this extra layer of something, of political not everyone. I mean, some people are just living their lives and don't. But it's a lot bigger in the U.S. It's a lot more important, and in Australia, it's crazy because most people in Australia, like, we are aware of the U.S. politics and stuff, but everyone's just way closer to the center. Like everyone's maybe it's. I have suspicions that it's something to do with actually just like the lifestyle. I mean, Australians, I think I would theorize that we get more sleep, for instance, and we have more like really. I think actually maybe one of the main problems in the States is that people get around 6 hours of sleep a night on average, like way below what they should be getting, and that's just average. I mean, on the more extremes, some people are getting 3 hours, and like you cannot think like a rational person if you have 4 hours of sleep a night, whatever it is.
Yeah. I also think that there's something psychologically about the fact that we've got a social safety net, and it's not perfect by any means, but ultimately, I'm never going to starve to death in Australia as an Australian citizen. If I can't hold down a job, I can apply for Centrelink and I can just get money from the government forever. And if I can't fill in the forms from Centrelink, then I can go on the DSP. If I can't fill in all the forms to go on the DSP and I end up homeless, there's homeless shelters. And if the people that are homeless in Australia are people that have fallen through all of those different levels. The only people that are homeless, basically, it's like something like 70 or 80% of homeless people in Australia have mental illness. And it's a tragedy when you see homeless people, but the people are homeless because they're not socially with it enough to be able to be in a homeless shelter without endangering and harming other people that are in the homeless shelter. That's the final crack. And if you fall through that, you end up homeless on the street. And there's a few homeless people around where I live. It's not like there's no homeless people, but in America, lots of people are homeless just because of bad luck. Yeah. And if you're homeless, if you could be homeless, destitute, and starve to death, if only because of bad luck, then I think psychologically at some level, to be able to have a sense of safety and to feel like you're okay and you're going to be okay and the people that you love are going to be okay, then of course you're going to band together much more closely and have much more close-knit communities with the people that share the same interests as you, so that you know that there's going to be people out there that are going to look after you. When I was living in the States, I was really impressed. I mean, all of these things, right? Remember all these weaknesses. If you spend your life making up for a perceived weakness, you're going to end up really strong in some areas. And my friends in the States are so much better than all of the Australians I've ever met at forming community and being there for each other and showing up regularly, organizing events, doing all of the things they need to do to be able to build community, because they need that community to be able to feel safe in the world. And like, I think there's a whole bunch of things that come out of that.
A friend of mine went through a hurricane, and he's a young guy. He stayed with his friend, and they said they had never been closer with their community, because when the neighbor needed a tree out of their driveway, they moved the tree out of the driveway. Like when somebody else needed whatever food, like they shared everything. They just shared everything with their entire community. And so disaster brought them infinitely closer.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have it very good in Australia, but I understand what you mean. It's like we're not, first of all, we're not really prepared for bad times in a very realistic way.
Yeah. It's that line about the lucky country. I mean, humans at an individual and a societal level, I think, are like anti-fragile. And people have heard that term, but the idea is, I love this metaphor. If I have here's a glass. If I throw this on the floor, it might shatter, it might break. And even if it doesn't break, it might have microfractures. If I have a kid's sippy cup, right, like a plastic cup, throw that on the floor, they won't break. It's fine. It's resilient. So the glass is fragile. The sippy cup is resilient. Humans are anti-fragile. If you throw us on the floor, we don't just not break, we get stronger. That's how humans are. That's our, in 100 different ways. Why is exercise good for us? Because it injures us. That's why it's good for us. We get injured by exercise. And then what happens? Well, our body comes back stronger because we're anti-fragile. There's a theory that broccoli and a couple other foods are good for you because they contain certain chemicals that your body says, Brussels sprouts, I would only be eating this food if there's no other food to go around. So your body says, oh God, if you're eating Brussels sprouts, things must be really dire out there. We're going to try and reorient our body chemistry such that we live longer so we can have babies later, because obviously there's a drought on if you're eating Brussels sprouts.
Wow.
And so people live longer because you're eating food that your body thinks is low-key poisonous. This is like how humans are.
I love Brussels. Oh my God.
Right? I this is a theory. Obviously, it's very hard to prove these things. But so you look at societies. I mean, I'm actually, in some ways, I think there's some benefits that come out of COVID and the whole COVID experience, because they forced us as a community to make decisions collectively as a community. You can see which leaders made it and which didn't. Like my state premier here in Victoria in Australia is incredibly popular because every day for 200 days straight, he had a press conference talking about the latest numbers and what was going on with COVID. He was there for people, and he was there in a kind of disappointed dad style way. But the crisis meant that the leadership and the capacity for leadership was pressured. It's, I don't know. There's that line that that what is it? Good times make weak men make bad times make strong men men make good times. Strong good times make weak men, right? But having pressure on us it strengthens us in those ways. And in those ways, as I say, I think that America is much stronger at the capacity to form community that Australians aren't, because we don't get that kind of pressure. But on the flip side, I like not having that pressure. I really like knowing that there's not going to be fist fights over whatever nonsense. Like there's just all of these things that I take for granted in Australia. I just feel safe. I feel safe when I'm outside. In a way, I visited Hawaii in January, and Hawaii is a lovely place, and I describe it's like a tropical paradise and muscle cars. That's the experience. And one night I was going for a walk with a friend and walking down the street from where we were staying in Airbnb, and there's these like 4 or 5 dudes on the side of the road. They're with their cars and drinking, and it's on dusk, and I'm my friend's short girl and we're like on the other side of the road, and these guys are like, "Oh, who are you? Come over," and I'm like, all right, this is going somewhere, and these guys are fantastic, like so interesting. This guy I was talking to, he's like, "Oh, where are you from?" "Oh, Aussies. We haven't had Aussies here for so long," and then telling us how he's bought this like little slope patch of land and he's going to be growing coffee beans on it. But then launched into this whole thing about how fruit used to grow bigger in America before all the chemtrails were, and but like here's this guy who's fantastic, and I felt fear, and because people feel fear, he is better at forming community and making people feel welcome, because that's a thing that he has to deal with. And I don't need to feel fear when I walk around in Australia, and we don't have a strong community in Australia as a result, but I still like living here better. So
dude. When I'm in the States, it's like another level of, it's like I get hyper vigilant, and I'm more hyper vigilant than most people, I think. But like just things like if I'm sitting in a cafe, I'm constantly looking at everyone, and because anyone can have a gun, any single person walking around, whether they're mentally deranged, whether they're talking to themselves, whether they're a housewife, they can just have a gun. And so you have to, I just find myself constantly scanning, like, and I would just have so many situations in the US when like I would be talking, and then I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but my verbal ability completely shuts off. Like I just can't talk. And I'm just like, and I'm just watching this person, and someone's talking, and it goes in one ear and out the other like immediately, and I can't even say words, and like because it's just survival instinct is kicking in. And it's such a different state of mind. It's so much more like vigilance constantly. And I think about what it must be like to grow up in a bad neighborhood in the States, because if that's what you're growing up with, like the opportunities that you don't have, like your brain or your environment is cutting off opportunities from you, because for the simple fact that you're just in fight or flight mode all the time. And you probably, I jump to anger really quickly when I'm in that state. Like I get angry at people, and like it's just how my body is and how I respond. And like I cannot imagine growing up like that. It's just, even if you had a good education and you had enough resources, which many people don't, that alone would set you back. I mean, for most people,
Well, there's been studies on that. Like they found, I mean, I don't know about on that in particular, but there was a study I heard about years ago where they found that people who are living in poverty, like poverty caused about a 10 to 15% drop in, 10 to 15 points of IQ drop. So obviously not having many dollars in your wallet is not going to make you stupider. So what's the actual mechanism there? And I suspect it's exactly as you're describing, that if you're poor, and it's not about not having much money, it's about not feeling financially secure and safe, then the effect of that on your psychology is that you're going to be so much more alert, so much more fearful. And as a result of that, you score 10 to 15 points lower in IQ tests,
I think in that, if it's the same study that I was thinking of, it was also that those people were exposed to a lot of violence, like in their
Right.
like a lot of those people had something like a quarter. I don't know. It's been a long time, but something like a quarter had seen someone murdered, like, or maybe it wasn't that high. It wasn't that high, I'm sure, but like a tenth maybe, or I think a quarter had seen domestic violence in the home. So like even in their own house, there's violence, and so you literally cannot relax. There's nowhere to relax.
Well, in the wake of the most recent awful school shooting in America, I was listening to Sam Harris's podcast about it the other day, and it was so bizarre hearing them talk. I mean, as an Australian, hearing them talk about it. But one of the things they were talking about is that, you know, in preschool, his preschool age children have active shooter drills. So imagine, you know, I've got niece and nephew. I've got two nieces and nephew. Right, they're about. I mean, my oldest niece is I think 8 now, but at the age of 5, right? At 5 or 6, you go to school for the first time. And in your school, you have a drill on what happens if someone in your school, one of the other students, pulls out a gun and starts shooting everybody in the school.
What is the drill also? Like,
it's
close
like
the door? What do you do?
It's like hide. It's hide. And they were talking in this podcast about how stupid an idea that is, that what you should do, what they should be teaching all the kids is to run away. Because it's just way harder to hit someone that's running. So I don't have that sounds sensible to me, you know, saying how Ted Cruz is blah, 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 saying that we should have fewer doors in the schools and make schools more like prisons. And they were like, no, you should have even more doors so that the kids can run out of the school more easily, and you should tell them to all run away. Whatever. I'm just horrified by the idea of a 5-year-old child being taught in school what to do if someone opens fire on all of you, because that's just a thing that happens 200 times a year in the States. Like 200, what? Like, I mean, was it 200 times? I don't know, some ridiculous number of times. This is a thing that happens. And in America, if you get shot, it's very unlikely that you're going to be a school student being shot. Almost everyone that gets shot is shot in the streets or shot in suicide attempts, or there's 100 other ways that people, you know, get killed from gun violence in America. But that's just a fact of life. You know, it's a fact of life. It's taught to you in schools. It's in the communities. It's like all around. This is like people getting shot. So, like, exactly, what does that do to your psychology? I don't, like, I feel stressed and uncomfortable thinking about it, just talking about it. But
what it does, your baseline stress is so high that you go on the internet and you get angry at flat earthers and you talk shit about them. Fuck those guys.
Fuck those guys. Look, if I can make the flat earthers, like, there was a podcast, I didn't end up listening to it because I found it a bit boring, but there was a podcast a couple of years ago by someone at Vice called Conversations with People Who Hate Me. And so she'd been, I think it was at Vice, she'd been harassed online by people that got, you know, that said really awful, vile things. She was like, let's do a podcast about that. I'm going to seek these people out that have said awful things to me in the past, troll through my email, or troll through the YouTube comments, contact these people, get in contact with them, and then invite them onto my podcast to talk about that. And so, like, what do they say, right? Like, it was kind of boring because it was the same story a few times in a row. I was like, sure, whatever. Well, the person's kind of just weirdly mousy about it. It's like, oh, yeah, I don't know, things were happening. I don't know, like, and then my kid was sick. And then what happened? Well, and then before I went to bed, because my wife was mad at me for something, then I would just go on the internet and find people to be mad at, right? And then I felt a little bit better and I would go to bed. And that was like a thing that I did for 8 months. And I ain't proud of it because it was a terrible thing to do, but I just dehumanized people in my head and then talked, you know, talked about how terrible they were. So that way I could feel a little bit better about my awful life. You know, it's like, oof, okay. You know, next caller, like, let's talk about this person. Yep, very similar story. And this is, you know, this is what's going on. And it's like, and I think, as you say, like, I think part of the breakdown is that we're not seeing community across, you know, like, we're not humanizing the people that we're talking to on the internet. It's so easy to humanize people, but we're kind of like seeing them as people in the other tribe, right? Like, in the other tribe in 100 different ways. You know, the PC master race versus the console casuals, and the, you know, the obviously left and right, and the, I don't know, all the different things. People that think that COVID's a hoax, and people that don't.
What does Hacker News have? I'm sure they have some sort of fucking war between two tribes.
I don't know. There's a, well, they do, but they've got to be a bit snobby about it. Like, it can't be too explicit that it's about two tribes, right? So we can have opinions on, like, oh, well, you know, like, every time there's an article about Apple, it always gets upvoted massively on Hacker News because everyone's got their, like, schnuzzy Apple machines. But then there's obviously got to be a few people that are like, well, you know, I don't think that, you know, obviously I don't like corporations, blah, 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 you know, like, Apple's gone too far, and, you know, I use Linux and I use FreeBSD, and so there's a bit of that, and I don't know, there's just all these standard things.
Yeah,
but, yeah. Yeah, I was on it's one of the intellectual dark web related. I think it might have even been that on the subreddit.
Yeah.
This is during COVID, and someone posted and said, I'm Australian, and Australia had a very strict lockdown policy during COVID, and he went on there and said, oh, I'm in Australia in Victoria, and this is terrible, basically totalitarianism. And lots of people were agreeing with him and like, oh, that sounds awful. What an awful situation. I was like,
That's
what?
wild.
Yeah. And so I hopped in the comments and was like, hey, dude, like, I'm also in Victoria. Like, I live in the same city you do. Like, I hear what you're saying. Here's the question. What would you do if you were in charge? Like, and I'm not saying that, like, I'm not saying the policies are perfect. I'm just asking, what would you do? Right? You're saying that you don't like the policies. Well, what policies do you propose? I'm happy to listen. And we went back and forth for about, like, I don't know, 10 comments or something. By the end, of course, the guy admitted that, whatever policy suggestions that he had, he was like, oh, well, there should be more community consultation, right? He wanted to feel more invited into the conversation. Okay, like, I can hear that that's a stressor. And I also, just to name it and like be the world in this conversation, I don't think that would have resulted in any different policies, honestly. I think people are afraid and blah, 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 right? But I get that he feels like he wanted to have been asked more than he was.
Yeah.
And I can feel tension between that and in an emergency, the government wanting to have emergency powers, which is something that was a bit controversial. They invoked Emergency Powers Acts to be able to get emergency powers to be able to make things in a hurry, make decisions in a hurry. The government can make decisions in a hurry badly or make good decisions in a really large amount of time, or neither. But he wanted, but he didn't. I mean, this little conversation we had was right at the bottom of a Hacker News thread. Like the things that were upvoted in that Hacker News thread were people piling on and agreeing with the first thing that he said, his first idea, which was that he felt mad and he felt alienated. And we had a conversation, and I don't know, I'd like to think at least that, imagine myself as helping all of the lost children on the internet and, making the world a little bit better. But like, he was feeling lonely and isolated. And so feeling lonely and isolated comes out as this sort of hyper partisan politicized thing, not because he's saying, like, I don't think the thing he was trying to say was actually that, that the policies were bad. I think it was, I feel alienated and I feel isolated and I feel like I didn't opt into this. And
Which those feelings are really valid. I mean, for 2 years he was isolated and locked up, and maybe it was the right decision, but like, it sucks to be away from your friends for 2 years, especially for people who are super social. And like, I found more and more of myself thinking about this, like, people who get angry and who have the rage, oftentimes that comes from like a deep trauma. Like, even I was saying this to someone, like, even if you think of the worst people you can think, like white supremacists, right? Just the most evil people that you can think of. Like, do you think that they had good lives growing up? Like, someone decides to become a white supremacist. Do you think he just grew up in like a wealthy household with both parents who treated him with love and care, and then he just decided to go out and hate all the other races? Like, it's no, he probably had, like, I imagine, I'm using my imagination here, but you think like, probably got beaten up by his parents, probably got a lot of abuse, probably encountered bad situations with minorities, and then just decided that he hated all of them. Like, probably a lot of intense trauma that people went through. And like, when I see so much hatred out there, it's I'm oftentimes I go to a place of real sorrow for them.
Yeah, it's not, I mean, I have a lot of interesting interactions with humans in the world, and my girlfriend, she says that people react differently to me than they do to a lot of other people, and that she doesn't have those conversations with the same people, and that she finds it really interesting. But I don't know that, because every conversation that I'm in, I'm one of the participants of it, so I just don't get to know how it is. But that person that you're just describing, who's had domestic violence and was raised in an abusive household and blah blah blah, I mean, there's a white supremacist in every single conversation that he has. Like, how much would that suck? Like, right? Like, everyone's kind of the hero of their own story and gonna find a way to be able to spin their own story so that they're the hero of it. And to name it, I think that there is real evil in the world. Like, I think there are psychopaths and sociopaths, and I don't have any good answers that involve hugging to be able to resolve situations like that. I think there's a place for violence in the world. I'm not a pacifist. For example, when there's a kid shooting up a school, I think that's absolutely a place for violence. Enacted on the person that's shooting up those people. But also, um, they're the vast minority of people, right? Like the vast minority of the 1.1% of the America's population in jail are violent, are violent sociopaths and psychopaths. Almost all of those people are people like you and I that just they got unlucky in the birth lottery and grew up in a family where, I don't know, dad wasn't there or dad was violent, and where they were poor and they lived in a neighborhood where there was a lot of violence and right? Like, and all these things feed into each other, My my dad's dad, my dad's mom had schizophrenia, and my dad's dad left when my dad was little. And why did he leave? Well, because his wife had schizophrenia and she wasn't really there. So two tragedies, right? Like the tragedy of his mom having schizophrenia and having problems was compounded by the fact that his dad left. So now it's doubly bad for my dad, like when he was a kid. And I've got a huge amount of compassion for my dad for growing up in that kind of situation. And, of course there's more stories I could tell, which, aren't my stories to tell, but it's like, it's a tragedy. I sometimes think about this question of, if I could intervene in the world in any way, again, going back to that question, not just if I was president for a day, but if I could have a real lasting impact in the world, what would I want that impact to be? And one of the things I very strongly believe in is this idea that, like, we teach kids calculus, and we don't teach kids how to talk to each other and how to listen, you know? Like, there's just some fundamental skills about holding space and listening and being there for one another and giving ourselves permission to have the feelings that we feel, and forgiving ourselves for things that have happened in the past, including the ways that we've reacted, um, and accepting, there's just a whole bunch of skills here, the kinds of things that we learn at a retreat where we spend the week crying. But that there's nothing age related about that. Like, you shouldn't have to be in such a great situation in your life that you can take a week off work and everything else, pay a bunch of money to travel somewhere and have the kind of community and connections that are going to invite you to something like that so you can know about it, so that you can do that work, so that you can resolve your childhood trauma. I don't think that our society will survive on a tiny percentage of people getting over their problems. I think that I think we can do a lot better, and a lot better in caring for the citizens of our respective countries, in caring for the struggles that we all have, like, I mean, and the left talks about this, but this is like such a lovely thing to say, and I'm going to ruin it all by saying something kind of feel frustrated by. There's all this talk of like overlapping systems of oppression and blah, 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 right? But all the privileges people are talking about are things like, being white, being male, and being able-bodied. Like, yeah, how about the privilege of growing up in a family where you feel supported? That's not a white, it's not a skin color thing. It's not a gender thing. It's a skill thing, and it's a skill thing that we can improve with skills by teaching people and talking to people and holding space for them and listening and teaching the skills of listening so that they can do it in their own lives. So then in every conversation that they're in, they have the opportunity to have someone in that conversation that's got the emotional intelligence to be able to ask how the other person's feeling, and to be able to listen, and to be able to be listened to.
There's some really simple skills that I think would be useful for everyone to know, just like you said. So Jesse, at the start of the retreat, he got us to do a full body meditation from toes to head, and just kind of notice all the sensations in your toes and your feet and your ankles going all the way up. And then at the end, he said, okay, so I want you to stay in your body 50% and in the outside world 50%, and try to stay like that the whole week. And there was this idea that your emotions are a tuning fork. Like, our emotions are a tuning fork, and there's this kind of, in a lot of society, it seems like there's this implicit idea that you ignore your emotions and you have to get past your emotions in some way. Even like stoicism is just like, how do I be logical and not, use my emotions for everything? But it's like, no, your emotions are a really, really fine tuning fork. And if you pay attention to what this other person is saying, and then you feel a little bit of sadness, that's an indication of something that's important, or anger, and a lot of people, like, he did this other exercise where he says, like, from 0 to 100, how much anger are you feeling, how much sadness, joy, and because the idea is that most of us kind of suppress our feelings until the anger, for instance, is at 80%, and then we blow up. And like, actually, you can just feel the anger now. Like, what percentage is it? 5%? Just like, it's okay to pay attention to that and to like listen to it, because maybe it's telling you something. Maybe it's telling you that somebody is violating your boundary in this little tiny way. And if you respect it, then you can have a pleasant conversation that doesn't involve you blowing up because you let them go as they take 3 or 4 more steps in violating your boundaries, and then there's this huge issue. um,
Yeah. One of my sister's kids, we describe him, I joke that he's little Bam Bam. He's got anger issues. And I was listening to Dr. Jordan Peterson talk about this, and he said that kids who are violent, people that are violent, it's not that society, if you look at how aggressive children are, they don't go from being zero aggressive for all children through to some people becoming aggressive. It's that some kids are born with more aggression in them, with more anger. It seems to be what it is, and it manifests itself when they're really little, like when they're 3 or 4. And this is absolutely the case with my sister's kid. And it's society's role in teaching people how to relate with our anger in a way that's healthy. So, if a child grows up in a healthy way, as my sister's little boy is, you can see the anger in him. He's slowly learning a relationship with that anger, which isn't suppression, and it's also, shouldn't be suppression, and it's also not just letting it have its way and express itself violently all the time. So he is being civilized. That's what that word means. To be civilized is in to be brought in as part of civilization. And I kind of had the opposite problem when I was a kid. That I felt like anger was never allowed. It was always bad and always a bad thing. And one of my friends were, after a series of few bad experiences that I had that I reflected a lot on, which I won't go into now. One of my friends said, "Yeah, Seph, I really wish that you. It's like the oven goes from being room temperature up to being 300 degrees in an instant. I really wish that I knew at each degree of temperature that the oven was raising, that the oven was warmer. That, if you feel a little bit frustrated with me, then she wanted to know, because then she gets to feel safe and we can resolve things when I'm only a little bit frustrated. But instead of letting her do that, because I wasn't letting myself feel that anger that I felt, like the frustration that I felt, I was bottling it up because it's not appropriate and you can't possibly be angry at someone. So I was bottling it up, and sometimes that was okay. And very occasionally, it wouldn't be resolved, and then it would get to, she was afraid it would get to 300 degrees, and then I'd just be like, no, we're not friends anymore, I hate you, or whatever it is, right? But actually, that's me not caring for myself, because I'm not respecting my own anger and the frustration I feel. I'm still respecting it at the extreme. I'm just not respecting it at the small level, and I'm not respecting our capacity in a friendship to be able to talk about the thing that I'm frustrated with and be able to resolve it anyway. And actually, it turns out that when you feel frustrated with someone, it's way easier to resolve it when you're only a little bit frustrated than when you're really frustrated. You know, like, hey, I'm like 10% frustrated over this thing. Oh, okay. Like, was that really frustrating for you? I mean, it was like 10% frustrating for me. Oh, okay. Like, I feel a bit sad hearing that. Okay. You don't even have to do anything. You don't have to fix it. Like, okay, and the frustration really just wants to be, this is what anger wants. Anger is saying, listen to me and pay attention to me. Pay attention to this. That's all anger really wants. And you know that because a lot of the time when you feel a bit angry, actually, if someone just really hears you and can reflect back and say the thing that you're saying in words that you would say, yeah, that's exactly what it is, the anger starts dissipating at that point. That's all the anger really wants. But if we don't let ourselves express the anger, right? Or if you hide it by pretending as if you're not angry, then people don't have enough information to know that it's really important they attune to you in that moment. So if you're like, oh, I've been having these thoughts, I think these things, they're like, yeah, whatever, right? Well, then your anger is going to build because they don't feel heard. And the person's thinking, well, obviously this thing doesn't mean that much to the other person because they didn't say it in a way that expressed the meaning that they had behind it. It didn't seem important to them. They were just telling me some facts. Okay, whatever. People tell me facts all day long. But if you express it as like, hey, I feel like 10% angry towards you. I feel 5% angry. I feel 20%. I'm kind of mad at you right now. Like I'm sitting with this feeling of madness. I have the tension. My chest is tight, and I'm like having these like feelings that I really don't like having, but like they're coming up, thoughts. Can I talk to you about it? Yeah. Please talk to me about it. I'd rather you talk to me about it than violence happens. Great. Well, it's all of this, the blah blah blah, right here. Oh wow, like you're feeling that way, like so tell me more. Like I'm really interested. This is interesting. So I did this thing, and then you had all of these thoughts, and now you're really really angry. Yeah, yeah, that's right. Or like, no, it's actually this thing. Oh, so it's this thing, right? You know, yeah, that's right. Oh, so it sounds like you have this story. There's this story that's in you. And it's not to say that the story is wrong, but or dismiss it. There's this story where when I do this thing, then that's like this thing that happened when you were a kid. And that thing that happened when you were a kid was totally not okay. And you really, really want to make sure that thing that happened when you were a kid doesn't happen again. And that instinct in you is trying to protect you and make sure that doesn't happen. Yeah, yeah, that's what's going on. Okay, I really want you to feel safe with me. I really want you to feel safe in situations. I don't. That story is not obvious to me, even though your projection onto me is that it would be obvious. But it's not obvious to me because I didn't have the same childhood that you had, and I can see that's important to you. So I'm going to attune towards it. And as an act of caring towards you, I'm going to try and respect that inside of you and know that that's true about you. So like, thank you for telling me. And like, please get therapy. Like, and like these stories that we have about the world that we project onto the world, they're often not true about the actual world. They're something that we believe that we project on. And, doing the work of talking about it and so on is how we put down some of that stuff and recognize that we're actually adults.
I like how you, in that entire conversation, it was contained. It was a self-contained anger that you demonstrated. And so instead of, because a lot of times people can be like, you made me angry because you did this and you fucked up and all this different stuff. It's like very projected. It's like you. But you in that moment demonstrated, hey, when you did this, I got angry. And so it's not like you necessarily did something wrong, even. It's just like, when you did this, I felt this. And you're not telling them that they're wrong, and you're not telling them that they did the wrong thing, because they might have done something completely right. And then you said, in that moment, it sounded like you said, well, this anger feels a lot like the anger I felt when my mom would burst into my room without knocking and violate my boundaries, right? Or whatever it is. It's like, does this anger feel like a thing from my past? And is it possible that my friend is doing something fairly innocuous, maybe a little bit annoying, but I'm actually bringing this giant memory from my past and throwing it at them? And
to name it though, that's a very advanced technique.
Yeah.
Like, and usually it doesn't make sense to go straight to there. Usually it makes sense to really listen to the anger first. And once the anger's been listened to, then you can start asking questions about, like, how old were you when you first felt angry like this? Can you tell me the story of this anger, of like why that experience and that event led to you feeling really angry? Because that's just really, often when people get angry about something, it's not obvious. Like, it's like obvious to them. It's like, if I did that, the only reason I would do that is because I hate you, But to someone else, it's like, what? Like, huh? Like, I'm confused. Like, I took out the rubbish. I got in trouble with a girlfriend I had years ago, because she's really short, and we were going on this road trip with our bikes, and she started taking the bikes off the back rack. She's really short. She was really struggling to pick them up. So I just went up and started picking the bikes up. And she got really angry because her interpretation of my action was that I was being sexist and implying that because she's a girl, she couldn't do it, right?
I'm sorry, sweetie. Girls don't know how to take bikes off racks.
Right. But the way that I was brought up, it's that, like, if my mom's drying the dishes, I don't have to. If I have to ask my mom, "Oh, mom, do you want help with that?" Then I'm the asshole, right? Like, I should just go and do it. Like, don't make her ask. So this is just like different cultural contexts. So for her, if she was doing that, if she was me and doing that, it would be because she had that belief. But for me doing it, it's not that at all. So it's like, first of all, listen to the anger. Like, the anger needs to be listened to. That's what it wants. And secondly, like, okay, now that I've heard you, like, do you feel heard, right? I'm looking for you to feel heard. Then can we talk about it? Can we talk about the actual thing that you're angry about? Because I really don't like making you angry. I care about you and I want you to have a good experience. And, let's try and strategize together. And that's kind of what you want. But, like, to name it, there's this running, me and my girlfriend are, we've been playing this trashy idle game, and you, like, get XP and different skills. And this is her metaphor, and I love it. She's like, well, sometimes you've got like 5 XP in a thing, right? Like, you're just level 1, you're not very good at it yet. And it's okay not to be very good at things. You're level 1 at everything when you start off. That's how games, that's how it works. So what I'm describing is is you got your skill cape, you're like level 99 in dealing with anger, but there's lots of ways to be level 1 at dealing with anger. One is, you suppress it all the time because anger is always wrong. And another one is you always express it because you've got no ability to be able to recognize in yourself the anger that you're feeling. And the work for a lot of us is that we want to develop, one of the ways that this is described in personal development circles is that we're looking for discernment. Like, we're looking to become complex. So it's not that there's no simple answer. That first line of the Tao Te Ching of, what is it? The Dharma that can be named is not the eternal Dharma. Like this idea that any set of rules that you can express, that ain't it. It's going to be more complicated than that. So what you're looking for is the capacity to, in this case, express anger when anger is appropriate, and feel the anger that you feel when anger is appropriate, because there's situations where anger is appropriate, right? At that school shooting, there were police standing outside not doing anything while the children were still being shot inside the school. That's a situation where anger is absolutely appropriate. And then there's a question of how do you relate with that anger? Do you recognize it in yourself? Do you have a bunch of different ways that you can express the anger, depending on how strongly you want to express it? There's that idea that all of the freedom that you have exists between stimulus and response. So between the moment that you experience something and the moment that you act, all of the freedom that you have as an individual exists in that small amount of time. And so the question is, how much freedom do you experience in your choice of how to relate with the things that are happening? And then there's like practical skills of like, okay, well, there's like 18 different ways that you can express different amounts of anger, using different words, using different physicality, using your body as an instrument to play this song. That's what you're trying to do. And you want to play the song that's going to get you the like outcome that you want, but also that's going to be true for you. And that's like part of the outcome that you're looking for. And that's, like this is hard stuff, right? Like this is the work of a lifetime to get really good at this stuff. But also, it's such a tragedy to me that we don't even talk about this at all in schools. You've got to, as I say, you've got to go to a week-long retreat to be like, oh, wow. I had to go to improv and then try and express anger on stage to realize I even had a problem with anger, that I didn't know how to express it. And like, that's a bit of an indictment on our society, in my opinion.
And even when people say like process your emotions, like what the fuck does that mean? Like do I go down to the emotion processing plant and throw my emotions in, or like go to therapy is a common one, but a lot of therapists fucking suck. Like, and not only not just that, but like even decent ones are oftentimes, I've noticed that I've met some therapists who are very intellectual and they're like in their thoughts and like, how, like, I don't know, it's all about cognitive behavioral therapy. Like, let's make your thoughts different. Let's like every time you say I hate myself, instead say I love myself. And it's like maybe that's one way of doing it, and maybe it works sometimes, but like there isn't a lot of therapists aren't generally trained to like resonate with your emotions. Like, hey Seph, when you say that thing about anger, I feel sad because you felt a little bit trapped. It seems like you were trapped. I feel trapped, like, and I'm resonating with you. And so even this like go to therapy thing doesn't, it's not a good rule a lot of the time. Even if you find a therapist who you like, which is doubtful. I don't know, we're severely under equipped in a lot of different ways. But luckily we have YouTube. I mean, luckily idiots can just go up and talk about their feelings and post them on my channel. And
yeah. I mean, as I said, I really like Dr. K, the Healthy Gamer GG, his YouTube channel. He's very intellectual. I've also had a therapist that I've seen on and off that she's fantastic. She is not at all anywhere similar to Dr. K, but I like Dr. K for his ability to say, oh yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I can see all of that in this corner of the barn, and I'm going to show you a couple other windows that you can look at what's going on with you through, that's going to reveal different things and give you the opportunity to see and contextualize what's happening and the struggles that you're facing from different perspectives. Like, I think that's really powerful stuff. And as you're saying, like, the something that Pema Chodron says. She's one of my she's like Buddhist mum. She's this Canadian lady that ended up studying under Chodron from Rinpoche in India, I think. And but she says it's like we're all beggars on the street, like begging for love and begging for all of these things and begging for wholeness. And right underneath our feet, a foot under the ground, there's treasure. There's there's gold bullion. There's all of this, all of the wealth that we could possibly want, and it's all right there. Like, and this is something why, I mean, to bring us full circle, why I think about play a lot, because in that play perspective, when you're actually playing on a piano, your instinct for play, your instinct for what comes next, if you can listen and attune to that, that's got all of the wisdom that you could ever possibly need. Like, that will take you towards wholeness whenever you listen to it. Of, like, as you're saying, I express something and then you say that you feel sad. You feel sad and you feel trapped. Sitting in that feeling of sadness, like, this is something that my therapist taught me, that I still my instincts always struggle with it. It's this, often I talk to her and I'm trying to like hold on to all of the ideas or take notes or something. And she's like, no, 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 no. You know, a lot of the time, these problems that we have, they don't need to be fixed. Like you don't often don't need to do anything different. The work is in the perception and giving ourselves permission to perceive how we're experiencing things and the feelings that we feel. Like if something happens and I feel angry and I sit with that anger and listen to it, and it's not about like, again, this isn't an XP1 thing. It's about listening to what the anger really wants. Like, why do I feel like I've been violated in some way? How have I been pushed? Why is this unhealthy? Then if I can listen to that and be with that, then often there's massive wisdom in it. It's like, oh yeah, hang on, there is this thing that is important to me. I have been neglecting that. I'm really glad that my anger came up, because otherwise I would have skipped straight past that. I would have been less than who I want to be as a result of skipping out on the tuning fork, listening to the tuning fork and what that's saying. And it's like this in lots of ways. I'm taking a break with work a couple weeks. Why? Because I listened and I noticed that what I was doing with my own work is cracking the whip on my own back, and that as a result I'm not getting very much done. And then when I'm trying to rest, I'm beating myself up a bit for resting because I feel like I should be working harder. And I'm like a bit sad that I experience that cycle. It feels a bit like I'm a little child and that child isn't being cared for inside of me. And I don't know what perfect looks like. I'm not trying to be perfect. But how do I care for myself better? Well, I care for myself better by giving myself permission to rest when I feel tired. And so caring for myself by saying, hey, I'm going to take a rest for a couple of weeks. Doing that publicly means that I feel less of the pressure to get work done, because I've just removed the expectations from other people, which I feel quite actively. But like that's where the wisdom is. I firmly believe that if you just keep on following that road, then you lead to a place of wholeness inside yourself, and that's got all of the answers.
I think that's a beautiful place to finish our conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming on, Seph. I had a really great time.
Great. I had a really great time too. Thanks for inviting me.
Just before we leave, where can people find you?
I've got a blog at josephg.com, but as you say, I only blog about once a year. People mostly can't find me.
Huh. You're hidden.
Yeah.
Well, if he does post, you'll see it on Hacker News because it's making the front page.
Basically every post. Yeah. I'm increasingly thinking it might be worth me talking about this stuff more. I think there's something here, and I think there's something important to be sharing with the world. So maybe people will find out more about me over time. But yeah.
I look forward to it. All right. See you later.
All right. Bye.